Tonight, as your body settles into the softness beneath you, as your breathing finds its own rhythm like waves finding shore, I want to share something with you. 12 ancient gates will open before us one by one, each revealing a teaching that has traveled across centuries to reach this very moment. You need do nothing but listen, letting these stories wash over you like warm water, dissolving the accumulated weight of your day. We begin, as all journeys must, at the beginning, though you will see, before we are done, that the beginning and the end are not so far apart as they seem. There was once a young monk who lived in a mountain monastery so remote that clouds would settle in the courtyard like visiting guests. His name has been forgotten by time, as names often are, but what he learned remains. This monk was earnest in his practice, sitting in meditation each dawn until his legs ached, studying sutras until the characters swam before his eyes, sweeping the monastery floors with the kind of attention he imagined brought one closer to enlightenment. Yet despite all this effort, he felt no closer to peace than when he had arrived 3 years before. If anything, he felt heavier, as though his seeking itself had become a burden he carried everywhere, even into his dreams. One autumn morning, when the maple leaves were turning the color of fire and the air held that particular crispness that makes you feel more awake than usual, the old master called him into the garden. The master was ancient, his face a landscape of wrinkles that mapped out decades of smiling, and he moved with the unhurried grace of someone who had finally learned there was nowhere to rush to. In his weathered hands he held a stone, ordinary and grey, about the size of a rice bowl, worn smooth by some long-ago river. "This stone," the master said, placing it in the young monk's palms with surprising weight, "contains a teaching of immeasurable worth. I want you to carry it to the summit of the mountain. There you will understand what it has to teach you." The young monk bowed deeply, cradling the stone against his chest. Finally, he thought, a special practice, a secret teaching, something that would unlock the door to the peace he sought so desperately. He did not notice how his master's eyes crinkled with something that might have been amusement or perhaps compassion. Those two things often look the same in the faces of the truly wise. The path to the summit was not long, perhaps 3 hours for a healthy man walking steadily, but it was steep in places, requiring the use of hands to pull oneself up over roots and rocks. The young monk began enthusiastically, the stone held carefully in both hands. Such a precious thing, containing teachings of immeasurable worth, deserved to be treated with reverence. He imagined what wisdom it might hold. Perhaps the words of the Buddha himself, carved in characters so small they could only be read at the summit where the air was clearest, or maybe the secret to instant enlightenment, or the answer to the koan that had been troubling his meditation for months. After the first hour, his arms began to tire. The stone, which had seemed a manageable weight in the garden, now felt considerably heavier. He tried holding it different ways, cradled in his arms like an infant, pressed against his chest, gripped in his increasingly sweaty palms. Sweat began to trickle down his back, despite the cool autumn air. When he reached a flat section of the path, he allowed himself to rest, setting the stone carefully on the ground beside him while he drank from his water gourd. Looking down at the stone during this rest, he examined it more closely for the first time. It was truly ordinary, grey and smooth, with no markings visible on its surface, no hidden characters, no mysterious qualities whatsoever. A flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Had the master made a mistake? But no, the master never made mistakes. The teaching must be hidden, perhaps revealed only at the summit, perhaps requiring a certain light or angle to become visible. He picked up the stone again and continued climbing. The second hour was harder. His arms trembled with fatigue. Several times he had to set the stone down to navigate particularly difficult sections of the path, then return for it, essentially climbing those sections twice. The stone seemed to grow heavier with each step, as if it were absorbing the weight of his effort. His mind, which had started the journey full of pleasant anticipation, began to complain. Why couldn't the master have given him a smaller stone? Why did the teaching have to be at the summit? Couldn't wisdom be found in the valley too? Maybe he could rest longer, or come back tomorrow when he was fresher. But he was a diligent student, so he continued. One foot, then the other. Adjust the grip on the stone. Breathe. Step. Adjust. Breathe. Step. The rhythmic simplicity of it became almost meditative, though his meditation was flavored with increasing resentment. His shoulders burned, his fingers cramped. At one point, he nearly dropped the stone and felt a flash of panic. What if it shattered? What if the teaching was lost because of his carelessness? By the third hour, the young monk was no longer thinking about secret teachings or instant enlightenment. He was thinking only about the weight in his hands, the ache in his shoulders, the burning in his legs, the summit that never seemed to get closer. He had stopped imagining what the stone might teach him. He simply wanted to arrive, to complete the task, to set this burden down. The stone had become everything, the entirety of his world reduced to the sensation of carrying something heavy up an endless mountain. When he finally crested the ridge and saw the summit before him, a small clearing where the mountain's peak flattened into a table of stone surrounded by ancient pines, he felt a surge of relief so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. His master sat there waiting, somehow having arrived before him, seated on a flat rock with his eyes closed and a slight smile on his face, as if he had been there since the beginning of time. The young monk stumbled forward and fell to his knees, gasping, carefully setting the precious stone on the ground before him. His arms felt strange without its weight, floating almost, tingling as blood returned to compressed vessels. He waited, still breathing hard, for his master to speak, to reveal the teaching, to explain what the stone contained, to make the last 3 hours of suffering worthwhile. The master opened his eyes and looked at the stone, then at his student. His smile deepened. "Good," he said simply. "You have brought it here." He paused, and in that pause the young monk heard the wind moving through the pine needles, a sound like the ocean, like breath itself. "Now," the master continued, gesturing toward the valley far below, a dizzying drop into mist and distant green, "throw it away." The young monk's mind stopped. Surely he had misheard. Surely the master meant something else. "Master," he said carefully, his voice still rough from exertion, "did you say throw it away?" "Yes. Throw the stone into the valley. Let it go." "But the teaching. You said it contained a teaching of immeasurable worth. And so it does. Did you not feel it, every step of the way?" The young monk looked at the stone, lying there innocent and grey on the summit rock, and something began to shift in his understanding. He thought of the weight in his hands for 3 hours. He thought of how he had carried it because he believed it contained something precious. He thought of how the weight had grown not because the stone changed, but because he was tired. He thought of how his mind had moved from excitement to doubt, to resentment, to simple endurance. He thought of all the things in his life he carried the same way, old grievances worn smooth by years of handling, expectations he had carried up steep paths, ideas of who he should be that he cradled carefully against his chest, heavy thoughts about the future, heavier thoughts about the past. "The teaching," his master said softly, "is not in the stone. The teaching is in the carrying, and the teaching is in the letting go. You chose to carry this stone because I told you it held wisdom. You suffered under its weight because you believed the suffering would lead somewhere. But look at your hands. Now they are empty, and they were always meant to be empty. The stone taught you its lesson through its weight. Now it will teach you its second lesson through its absence." The young monk picked up the stone one last time. It felt lighter now, or perhaps he felt stronger, or perhaps there was no difference between these two things. He stood at the edge of the summit, drew back his arm, and threw the stone with all his remaining strength out into the valley. For a moment he could track its arc through the air, tumbling end over end, and then it was lost to sight, swallowed by distance and mist. He did not hear it land. For all he knew, it was still falling. What he did feel was the sudden lightness of his hands, his arms, his shoulders. What he did notice was how the wind felt cool on his sweat-dampened skin. What he did hear was the silence that was not really silence, but filled with birdsong and rustling branches, and his own breath, slower now, easier. What he did see was the view from the summit mountains receding in layers of blue and purple toward the horizon. The monastery far below looking like a child's toy, clouds casting moving shadows across valleys he had never explored. "This is what the Buddha meant," his master said, standing beside him now, when he taught that letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. We spend our lives carrying stones up mountains, believing they contain what we need, believing the weight is necessary, believing we cannot set them down until we reach some imagined destination. But the destination is here, the freedom is now, the happiness is waiting in the simple act of opening your hands. The young monk stood there as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the clouds gold and orange and pink. His hands were empty, his arms were tired but growing lighter with each breath. Something in his chest had loosened, some knot he had not known was there until it began to untangle. He thought of all the invisible stones he had been carrying, the harsh word his brother spoke 5 years ago, the mistake he made in last week's sutra recitation, the fear that he would never be as wise as his master, the weight of trying to be anything other than exactly what he was in this moment. One by one, he felt them roll from his hands. One by one, he heard them fall into valleys too deep for sound to return. One by one, he felt himself becoming lighter, not because he was gaining something, but because he was losing weight he was never meant to carry. "Come," said his master, turning back toward the path. "It will be dark soon, and the way down is always easier than the way up when your hands are empty." And so they walked together back down the mountain as the first stars began to appear in the deepening blue above them, the young monk's hands swinging free at his sides, learning the strange and wonderful sensation of carrying nothing at all. Perhaps, right now, as you lie here in the darkness with these words falling soft around you like snow, you can feel it too, that weight you have been carrying, those stones you collected without meaning to, smooth from constant handling, heavy from constant holding. Perhaps you can imagine, just for tonight, what it might feel like to let them roll from your palms, to let them fall into whatever valley waits below, into the mist, into the forgetting, into the gentle darkness that asks nothing of you except that you rest. Your hands need carry nothing into sleep. The stones, whatever they are, can wait until morning, or they can fall away completely. Either way, they are not yours to hold right now. Right now, you need only this breath, this softness, this letting go. And that teaching, like the young monk discovered, is worth more than anything you could carry. As you sink deeper into comfort, you're breathing slower now than when we began. Let us walk together through another gate. The young monk from our last story learned about the stones we carry. But there is another kind of weight we bear without realizing it, the weight of what we think we already know. This brings to mind a teaching that happened not on a mountain, but in a simple room where tea was served, where a master waited with infinite patience for a student who could not stop talking long enough to learn. In the late 19th century, in a modest temple in Japan where cherry blossoms fell like snow each spring, there lived a Zen master named Nan-in. His name meant southern source, and indeed, students came from all directions seeking the wellspring of wisdom they heard flowed from his teaching. But Nan-in was not interested in admirers or collectors of spiritual ideas. He was interested in transformation, which requires first an emptying, a making space, a fundamental humility that many who sought him did not possess. One afternoon, when the light slanted golden through the paper screens and the sound of the bamboo fountain kept its patient rhythm outside, a visitor arrived at Nanin's gate. This was no ordinary student, but a university professor, a man of considerable learning and reputation, who had published papers on philosophy and religion, who had read extensively about Buddhism and Zen, who could quote sutras and discuss doctrines with impressive fluency. He had come, he explained to the attendant monk, to learn about Zen from the famous master Nan-in, though if you listened carefully to his tone, you might have detected that he expected to discuss Zen more than learn it, perhaps even to share his own insights with this provincial teacher. The attendant led him to a small room where Nan-in waited, seated on a simple cushion beside a low table. The master was elderly, his back curved like a question mark, his face deeply lined, his movements slow and deliberate. He gestured for the professor to sit, and with a slight bow, indicated that tea would be served. The professor sat, adjusting his fine robes, clearing his throat in that particular way people do when they are preparing to speak at length. As Nanin began the ceremony of preparing tea, the professor began to talk. He explained his background, his studies, his publications. He mentioned the other Buddhist teachers he had visited, comparing their approaches. He shared his theories about the relationship between Zen and Western philosophy, between meditation and psychology, between koans and logic puzzles. He spoke about enlightenment as if it were a subject for academic dissertation, about mindfulness as if it were a technique to be analyzed and catalogued. Nanin listened, or appeared to listen, his hands moving through the ancient motions of the tea ceremony with a grace that suggested 10,000 repetitions had worn away all unnecessary movement. He warmed the pot, measured the tea leaves, poured the water at precisely the right temperature. The professor barely noticed, so absorbed was he in his own discourse, so eager to demonstrate the breadth of his knowledge. The words poured from the professor like a river and flood observations about different schools of Buddhism, comparisons between various practices, intellectual frameworks for understanding meditation, philosophical problems he saw in certain teachings, ideas he had developed for reconciling apparent contradictions in the texts. He had an opinion about everything, a theory for every question, an answer before any question could be fully formed. His cup, you might say, was already full to the brim with his own thoughts. Nan had finished preparing the tea. The professor, still talking, held out his cup without really looking at it, without pausing in his explanation of how Zen could benefit from certain Western methodological approaches. The master began to pour, the pale green tea flowing in a steady stream into the professor's cup. The cup filled. The professor continued talking about comparative religion, about epistemology, about the nature of consciousness as understood by various traditions. The tea reached the rim of the cup, Nan, and continued pouring. The tea began to spill over the edge, running down the sides of the cup, pooling on the saucer beneath. Still the professor talked, gesturing with his free hand while holding the overflowing cup in the other. Tea now streaming onto the table, and still Nanin poured, his face serene, his hand steady, the teapot tilting at the same measured angle. Tea flowing and flowing and flowing. Finally, the professor noticed. He jerked the cup away, tea sloshing onto his fine robes, his eyes wide with confusion and a touch of indignation. "Stop! The cup is full. No more will go in." And then, in the sudden silence that followed, with tea dripping onto the floor, and the professor staring at his stained robes, Nanin set down the teapot and spoke for the first time since the professor had arrived. "Like this cup," he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet somehow filling the entire room. "You are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" The professor opened his mouth to respond, to explain, to defend, and then something happened. Perhaps it was the shock of the moment, or the undeniable truth of the image before him, or the way Nanin's eyes held both compassion and unwavering clarity. The words he had been about to speak dissolved before reaching his lips. He looked down at his cup, overflowing, tea pooling in the saucer, dripping onto the table, staining the wood. He looked at the wet spots on his robes. He looked at the serene face of the master, who had just demonstrated in one simple action what hours of the professor's talking had failed to convey. For perhaps the first time in many years, the professor did not know what to say. His mind, so full of concepts and theories and opinions, suddenly felt like an obstacle rather than an asset. All his knowledge, which he had worn like fine clothing, now seemed heavy and restricting. He had come to this temple carrying his learning like the young monk carried his stone, believing it was precious, believing it would take him somewhere, not realizing it was the very thing preventing him from arriving. I understand," he began, but Nanin raised a gentle hand. "Do not understand," the master said. "Empty." And so the professor sat in silence, truly listening for the first time, while Nanin wiped the table with a cloth, his movements unhurried, almost ceremonial. The afternoon light shifted slightly. The bamboo fountain continued its patient music, and in that small room a transformation began, not through gaining new knowledge, but through the slow, humbling work of releasing what was already held too tightly. Nan in prepared fresh tea, and this time the professor watched each movement with attention he had never brought to anything before. He watched how the master's hands moved with neither hurry nor hesitation. He watched how the water was poured at exactly the right moment, not too soon, not too late. He watched how the tea was served with both hands, a gesture of offering, of respect, of presence. When the master offered him a new cup, the professor accepted it with both hands, bowing deeply. He did not speak. He did not offer opinions or theories. He simply held the cup, feeling its warmth, noticing its weight, seeing how the pale green tea caught the afternoon light. He brought it to his lips and tasted it fully, perhaps for the first time truly tasting tea, rather than thinking about tea, analyzing tea, comparing this tea to other teas he had drunk. It was bitter and sweet at once. It was hot and then cooling. It was simple and it was enough. They sat together in silence for a long time, master and student, teacher and learner, the roles finally clear because one had emptied himself enough to receive. Outside, cherry blossoms drifted past the window, letting go of the branch without resistance, falling with perfect grace, making room for what would come next. The professor visited Nan many times after that day. He came with fewer words each time, with less certainty, with more questions that he did not expect to have answered. He learned to sit in meditation with beginner's mind, approaching each session as if he had never meditated before, rather than bringing all his accumulated ideas about meditation. He learned to bow deeply, to sweep the temple floors with attention, to serve tea as he had been served with presence, with care, with empty hands. Years later, when he himself became a teacher, he would often tell the story of his first visit to Nanin. "I went to him full," he would say, "and he emptied me. I thought I was seeking knowledge, but what I needed was unknowing. I believed my cup was half full, ready to be filled the rest of the way. I did not realize it was overflowing with things that were not even tea, with concepts and theories and second-hand wisdom that blocked the direct experience of truth." He would pour tea as he told the story, carefully, attentively, always stopping before the cup was full, leaving space, always space, for what cannot be named or grasped or held too tightly. This teaching that Nanin offered this understanding that emptiness is not lack but possibility, that not knowing is not ignorance but openness, that a beginner's mind is not a deficit but a gift. This runs like a river through all of Zen. The Buddha himself taught this when he said that the trouble is, we think we have time. We think we can accumulate and accumulate, filling our cups with more and more, never pausing to pour out, to let go, to make space for direct experience of this moment, exactly as it is. What are you full of right now, as you lie here in the darkness? What opinions, what worries, what plans, what replays of conversations already finished? What rehearsals of conversations yet to come? What knowledge sits in your cup like old tea, bitter and cold, taking up space that might otherwise be filled with simple awareness of breath, of softness, of the sound of silence, of presence itself? The invitation is not to think about emptying your cup. The invitation is to let the cup tip over, to let the old tea spill out, to let the mind that grasps and holds and knows so much relax its grip. Just for now, just for this breath, just for this moment of settling into sleep. Nanin did not ask the professor to empty his cup through effort or force. He simply showed him what a full cup looks like, how it cannot receive, how it spills over, how it makes a mess of things. The emptying happened naturally once the professor truly saw, once he witnessed what his fullness was costing him. Can you feel it now? The slight relaxation that comes when you stop trying to figure everything out, when you release the need to know, when you let your mind be like an empty cup, still and receptive. There is a particular kind of rest that only emptiness allows, not the emptiness of loss, but the emptiness of openness, not the emptiness of nothing, but the emptiness of space for anything. In Zen they speak of beginner's mind, of approaching each moment fresh and new, without the burden of expertise. A beginner does not know what should happen, so they are present for what does happen. A beginner does not compare this experience to previous experiences, so they meet this experience directly. A beginner's cup is empty, ready to receive tea when tea is offered, ready to hold water when water is poured, ready to sit empty when nothing is given, reflecting the moon if the moon shines down. This is the teaching Nan offered, and the teaching receives you now. Empty your cup, not tomorrow, not through some grand spiritual project, but here, now, in this moment, as sleep begins to find you like water finding its level. Let the thoughts that fill your mind spill over and drain away. Let the worries that crowd your cup pour out onto the floor. Let the plans and the fears and the endless mental chatter overflow the edges and disappear into the darkness. What remains is space. What remains is openness. What remains is a cup finally empty enough to be filled with something new, something fresh, something that cannot enter until room is made. And perhaps, as you drift now towards sleep, you are discovering that the emptiness itself is enough, that the space itself is full, that the cup, empty and still, contains everything and nothing, which are not different things at all. Rest now in that emptying. Let go of what you know. Meet sleep with beginner's mind, as if you have never slept before, as if this night is the first night, as if your cup is finally, gratefully, empty enough to receive the gift of dreams, of darkness, of deep and healing rest. The night deepens around you, and your breath has found its rhythm, slow and steady as a tide. We have walked through two gates now, the gate of letting go and the gate of emptying. Tonight we approach a third gate, one that asks perhaps the most difficult thing of all, to remain undisturbed when the world seeks to disturb you, to hold your center when everything around you spins with drama and accusation. This is the story of a man who answered the storms of life with 3 words, and in those 3 words found an unshakable peace. His name was Hakuin Ekaku, and he lived in Japan during the Edo period, from 1686 to 1769. He was not always a Zen master. Once he was a young boy who feared death so intensely that he devoted himself to finding a way beyond it. Once he was a student who drove himself to exhaustion seeking enlightenment. But by the time of this story, he had become one of the most revered Zen teachers in all of Japan, living in a small temple in the village of Hara at the foot of Mount Fuji. Hakuin was known for his fierce teaching methods, his brilliant calligraphy, his penetrating koans, and most of all, for his complete equanimity, a word that means balance, composure, the ability to remain centered no matter what storms rage around you. But equanimity is not truly tested in the silence of the meditation hall. It is tested in the marketplace, in daily life, in moments when reputation and honor are at stake. It is tested, as Hakuin was about to discover, when a beautiful lie collides with an inconvenient truth. In the village of Hara, there lived a young woman, beautiful and unmarried, the daughter of a prosperous merchant who sold food to travelers on the great Tokaido road. She was of the age when marriage arrangements should have been made, when her future should have been secure. But she had fallen in love with a young man who worked in her father's shop, a boy with no prospects, no family name, no future that her father would accept. They met in secret, these 2 young people, as young lovers have always met, believing their love made them invisible, believing the world would somehow make way for their happiness. The world, as you might expect, did not make way. The young woman became pregnant. In that time, in that place, this was not merely a scandal. It was a catastrophe that could destroy her family's reputation, her father's business, her entire future. When her condition could no longer be hidden, her father confronted her with a rage born of fear and shame. Who was responsible? Who was the father? Give him a name so that arrangements could be made, so that honor could be preserved, so that the situation could be managed. But the young woman knew that naming her true love would mean his ruin as well as hers. Her father would never accept him. There would be no marriage, only punishment for them both. And so, in a moment of panic, in a desperate attempt to protect the boy she loved, she spoke the first name that came to mind, the name of someone her father could not touch, someone whose reputation was so solid that surely he could withstand the storm. It was Hakuin, she said. the Zen master. Can you imagine the shock that ran through the village when this news spread? Hakuin, the revered teacher, the monk who had devoted his life to practice, who taught others the way of purity and discipline, Hakuin had fathered a child with a young village girl. The story travelled from house to house like fire through dry grass. In the market, in the tea houses, in every home, people whispered and exclaimed and shook their heads. Some were delighted, as people often are when the mighty are brought low. Some were disappointed, having believed in Hakuin's virtue. Some were angry, feeling betrayed by a teacher they had trusted. The young woman's father, his face dark with fury, stormed to Hakuin's temple. He brought with him several other men from the village, witnesses to ensure the master could not deny what had happened. They found Hakuin in his simple room, seated in meditation, the morning light falling across his shoulders. When the father burst in, shouting accusations, demanding that Hakuin take responsibility, that he acknowledge his disgrace, that he at least have the decency to admit what he had done. Hakuin opened his eyes and looked at the angry men before him. "Is that so?" he said quietly. Just 3 words, 3 syllables in Japanese. So? Is that so? Not a denial, not a defense, not an explanation or an excuse or a protestation of innocence, just a simple acknowledgement that something had been said, that an accusation had been made, that this was the current state of affairs. The father had expected argument, denial, perhaps even a confession tinged with remorse. Instead, he got the strange, calm acceptance. It unbalanced him, as Hakuin's responses often unbalanced people. But the man pressed on. The child would be born. Someone had to take responsibility. Someone had to provide for it. Since Hakuin had done this thing, he would have to raise the child. "Is that so?" Hakuin said again. And so it was decided, there in that room, in that moment of fury and false accusation. When the baby was born, a healthy boy with a powerful cry, he was brought to Hakuin's temple and left at the door. The master accepted the child without complaint, without explanation, without any attempt to clear his name. His reputation, which he had spent decades building, lay in ruins. Students stopped coming. Donations to the temple dried up. People who had once bowed deeply when they saw him now whispered behind his back or turned away. The other monks looked at him with confusion and disappointment. Hakuin did not defend himself. He did not explain. He did not seek sympathy or understanding. Instead, he did what needed to be done. He cared for the baby. He who had spent his life in meditation and study now spent his days tending to an infant's needs. He begged for milk from the neighbors, many of whom now despised him, standing at their doors with the baby in his arms and his monk's bowl in his hand. Some slammed doors in his face. Some gave grudgingly, their faces hard with judgment. Hakuin bowed to them all with the same deep respect, thanked them with the same genuine gratitude. He changed the baby's soiled clothes. He walked the temple floor in the middle of the night when the child cried, bouncing him gently, humming old sutras as lullabies. He learned to tell the difference between hungry cries and tired cries and sick cries. He washed tiny clothes in cold water and hung them to dry in the temple garden. He did all of this with the same attention and care he had once brought to calligraphy, to meditation, to teaching. The other monks watched in bewilderment. Surely, they said among themselves, surely the master would explain. Surely he would tell them what really happened. But Hakuin said nothing. He simply cared for the child, day after day, week after week, month after month. The baby grew, began to smile, began to recognize the old monk's face, and reach for him with tiny hands. A year passed. The young woman, watching from a distance, seeing this revered teacher reduced to begging for milk to feed a child that was not his, seeing him accept disgrace without a word of protest, felt something break inside her. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was amazement. Perhaps it was recognition of a teaching so profound it could only be offered through action, never through words. She could bear it no longer. She went to her father and confessed the truth. The father she had feared, the young man she had loved, the lies she had told to protect him, all of it came spilling out in tears and desperate words. The real father was the boy who worked in her father's shop. Hakuin was innocent. She had lied, terribly and cruelly lied, and now a great teacher had suffered for her deception. The father was horrified. He had wronged an innocent man, a holy man, a teacher of wisdom. He rushed to the temple with his daughter, both of them prostrating themselves before Hakuin, pouring out apologies and explanations, begging forgiveness, trying to make the master understand what had really happened and why. Hakuin listened to it all, the confession, the apologies, the frantic explanations. The baby was playing nearby, now able to sit up, babbling contentedly. When the father finally finished speaking, when the words ran out and silence fell heavy in the room, Hakuin looked at them both with eyes that held no anger, no resentment, no triumph at being vindicated. "Is that so?" he said. The same 3 words he had spoken a year before when accused. The same 3 words spoken with the same quiet equanimity. When falsely accused, "Is that so?" When finally cleared, "Is that so?" No difference in his response. No attachment to reputation when it was destroyed. No clinging to vindication when it was offered. The father reached for the baby, to take him back, to restore him to his real parents, to end Hakuin's burden. Hakuin handed over the child he had cared for with such devotion, the same calm presence in his movements, the same gentle care. The baby, not understanding, reached back toward the old monk, the only father he had known. Hakuin touched the small hand briefly, a blessing, a farewell, and then let him go. The father and daughter left with the child, their apologies still hanging in the air, their explanations seeming thin and inadequate in the face of Hakuin's vast acceptance. The temple was quiet again. Hakuin's reputation, in time, would be restored. Students would return. People would bow again with respect. But something had been taught that could not be taught in any other way. What had Hakuin demonstrated in that year of false disgrace? He had shown that equanimity is not the absence of difficulty, but presence within it. He had shown that reputation is like the stone the young monk carried. We think it precious, but it is just a stone. He had shown that, "Is that so?" is not passive acceptance, but active freedom. It is the refusal to be disturbed by what cannot be controlled. It is the recognition that drama only exists when we resist what is. The Buddha taught that you will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger. Hakuin lived this teaching. When accused, he did not defend, and so he was not consumed by defensive anger. When vindicated, he did not gloat, and so he was not inflated by righteous pride. He simply met each moment as it came, did what needed doing, and remained centered in something deeper than reputation, deeper than fairness, deeper than the stories people tell about us. In Zen, there is a teaching about the unmoving mind, not a mind that is frozen or rigid, but a mind that remains centered while the world spins, like the axle of a wheel that stays still while the wheel turns, like the eye of a hurricane that remains calm while winds rage. Hakuin's "Is that so?" was the voice of the unmoving mind. Not indifference, he cared tenderly for the baby. Not passivity, he did what needed doing. But non-attachment to outcomes, to reputation, to the good opinion of others, to being right or being wronged. Think now, as you rest here in the darkness, of the storms you face, the accusations, fair or unfair, the dramas that swirl around you, the reputation you try to maintain, the explanations you feel compelled to give, the defenses you build, the resentments you carry when others misunderstand you. What would it be like to meet it all with, "Is that so?" Not as a way of giving up or giving in, but as a way of remaining free. Not as agreement, but as non-resistance. Not as defeat, but as the refusal to be pulled into drama that serves no one. Is that so? 3 words that create space between stimulus and response. 3 words that allow life to be exactly as it is without demanding. It match your preferences. Someone speaks ill of you. Is that so? Someone praises you. Is that so? Your plans fail. Is that so? Your plans succeed. Is that so? Rain falls when you wanted sun. Is that so? The world refuses to arrange itself according to your wishes. Is that so? Hakuin spent a year caring for a child that was not his, accepting blame that was not his, bearing shame that was not his, and when the truth emerged, when justice was done, when his name was cleared, he did not clutch at vindication. He let the child go as easily as he had accepted him, because he understood what we forget, that everything passes, everything changes, and the only peace available is the peace that remains steady through it all. You can rest in that peace now. Let go of the need to defend yourself, at least for tonight. Let go of the arguments you rehearse in your mind. Let go of the explanations you feel you owe. Let go of the way you wish things were, and simply meet what is. Is that so? Yes, that is so. And in that acceptance, not resignation but freedom, you can finally rest. The baby Hakuin cared for grew to be a man. The young woman and her lover eventually married. The father's business continued. The temple still stands at the foot of Mount Fuji. And somewhere in the long chain of students who studied with Hakuin, someone remembered the story and passed it down, generation to generation, until it reached you here, now, tonight. Is that so? Yes, that is so. And in these 3 words, ancient and new, spoken by a master who refused to be disturbed by storms, you can find permission to let the storms of your own life pass through you without being broken by them, without being defined by them, without losing your center. Breathe now. Is that so? Yes. Rest now. Is that so? Yes. Let go now. Is that so? Yes, 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 that is so. Your breathing has become so soft now, barely a whisper, and the weight of the day has almost entirely dissolved. 3 gates behind us, 9 still ahead, but there is no hurry, no rushing, nowhere to arrive that is not already here. This next story, perhaps the most famous of all Zen teachings, asks a simple question. When everything is falling apart, when danger surrounds you on all sides, when there is no escape, what can you do? The answer, as you will see, is both impossibly simple and profoundly complete. Long ago, in a time when the mountains were younger and the forests deeper, a man walked alone through wilderness. Perhaps he was a traveler, perhaps a merchant, perhaps simply someone who had lost his way. The old stories do not tell us his name or where he came from, because those details do not matter. What matters is what happened to him, what he faced, and what he discovered in a moment when most people would have discovered only terror. He was following what he thought was a path through dense forest, watching the ground for roots and rocks, when he heard behind him a sound that turned his blood to ice. The cough of a tiger. Not the roar you might imagine from tales and paintings, but the lower, more intimate sound a tiger makes when it has found prey and is preparing to strike. A sound that vibrates in your chest and awakens every ancient instinct that remembers what it means to be hunted. The man turned and saw it massive, striped, muscles rippling beneath its coat, eyes locked on him with the absolute focus of a predator that has already decided this chase is over. There was no question of fighting. There was barely time to run. The man did the only thing he could. He ran with every ounce of strength his fear could provide, crashing through undergrowth, leaping over fallen logs, his heart hammering so hard he could hear nothing else. Behind him, he could hear the tiger following, not hurrying because it did not need to hurry. Tigers are patient hunters. They know the forest, they know their prey, they know that panic exhausts, that fear tires, that eventually all running stops. The man burst through a thicket and found himself at the edge of a cliff, a sheer drop into a gorge so deep the bottom was lost in mist and shadow. No time to find another way. The tiger was seconds behind him, close enough now that he could hear its breathing, could almost feel the heat of it. At the cliff's edge grew an old pine tree, twisted by wind and time, its roots gripping the rock, some of its branches hanging out over the void. Without thinking, driven by pure survival instinct, the man grabbed one of these branches and swung himself over the edge of the cliff, hanging now in space, his fingers wrapped around rough bark, his legs dangling into nothing. Above him, the tiger arrived at the cliff's edge. It looked down at him with those amber eyes, intelligent and patient. It could not reach him here, but it could wait. Tigers are very good at waiting, The man's arms were already beginning to tremble from holding his own weight. He looked down, thinking perhaps he could climb down, find a ledge, discover some escape below. What he saw froze him with a new terror. At the bottom of the gorge, far below in the mist, another tiger prowled. Perhaps the mate of the one above. Perhaps just another hunter drawn by the commotion. It did not matter. Above him, a tiger. Below him, a tiger. And between them, only his grip on this branch, his fingers already aching, his strength already fading. How long can a man hang from a branch? Minutes, perhaps. Maybe an hour if he is very strong and very determined. But not forever. Never forever. The man knew this. He could feel his muscles beginning to burn, could feel the certainty of his eventual fall settling into his bones like cold water. And then, as if the situation were not impossible enough, he noticed something that made it worse. 2 mice had emerged from a crack in the cliff face near where the vine, for he saw now it was not a branch but a thick vine, was anchored to the rock. 1 mouse was white, 1 was black, and they had begun to gnaw at the vine. Their small teeth worked steadily, patiently, taking turns. The white mouse would nibble for a while, then rest while the black mouse worked. Then they would switch again. Day and night, you might say. Time itself, personified in 2 small creatures, steadily severing the only thing between the man and certain death. Let us pause here for a moment, you and I, as the man hung there between 2 tigers with mice eating away his lifeline. Let us feel the completeness of this trap, the perfection of this impossible situation. Above, death. Below, death. The vine being destroyed by time, strand by strand. No escape upward. No escape downward. No escape in staying still. Every option ending in the same place. This is not just a story about a man and tigers. This is a story about the human condition, about the situation we all find ourselves in, whether we acknowledge it or not. Above us, the tiger of the future, patient and certain. Below us, the tiger of the past, waiting with equal certainty. And the vine we cling to, this moment, this life, this body being eaten away by time, day after day, night after night. The white mouse and the black mouse taking turns, never stopping, never sleeping, always bringing us closer to the inevitable fall. Most people, facing this truth, spend their whole lives in the panic of the man running from the first tiger. They fill their days with distraction, with busyness, with anything that keeps them from looking up at the tiger of future death, or down at the tiger of past regrets, or at the mice gnawing away the present moment. They run and never stop to ask, what if I cannot run? What if there is nowhere to run to? What then? But this man, hanging from his vine, had run out of options for running. He had reached the place where all running ends. The place where every human eventually arrives if they are honest enough to stop pretending. And in that place, something remarkable happened. As he hung there, his arms trembling, his death certain whether by tiger above or tiger below, or by the patient gnawing of time itself, his eye was caught by something growing from a small crack in the cliff face, just within reach. A wild strawberry plant, somehow finding life in that harsh stone. And on that plant, one perfect strawberry, ripe and red, glowing in the afternoon sun like a small jewel. The man's situation had not changed. The tiger above still waited. The tiger below still prowled. The mice still gnawed, strand by strand, at the vine that held him. His death was still absolutely certain, probably within minutes. Nothing had improved. Nothing had been solved. The impossible situation remained impossible. And yet, the man reached out with one hand, increasing the strain on his other arm, making his fall even more imminent, and plucked the strawberry. He brought it to his lips. He bit into it, and the juice ran sweet across his tongue. And in that moment, he tasted something beyond fear, beyond the tigers, beyond the mice, beyond even death itself. How sweet it was. That is where most versions of the story end. 3 words that contain everything. How sweet it was. Not how sweet it would have been if the circumstances were different. Not how sweet it could be if only the tigers would leave and the mice would stop. How sweet it was, right then, right there, in the midst of impossible danger, in the face of certain death, hanging between past and future with time eating away the present. The Buddha taught that the secret of health for both mind and body is not to mourn for the past, not to worry about the future, but to live the present moment wisely and earnestly. This unnamed man, hanging from his vine, discovered that teaching not through study, but through necessity. When you cannot change the past, when you cannot control the future, when even the present is dissolving beneath your fingers, what remains? Only this breath, only this sensation, only this strawberry, impossibly red, impossibly sweet, impossibly present. Some people hear this story and think it is about ignoring danger, about pretending everything is fine when it is not. But that misses the profound truth at its heart. The man did not pretend the tigers were not there. He did not pretend the mice were not gnawing. He did not pretend he was safe. He saw his situation with absolute clarity, acknowledged the reality of his death, and then, precisely because he had stopped fighting what could not be changed, he was able to taste the strawberry with complete attention. This is what presence means, not the absence of difficulty, but the refusal to abandon this moment even when this moment contains difficulty. Not the denial of death, but the affirmation of life even in death's very jaws. Not the pretense that everything is fine, but the recognition that within everything, even within the not fine, there is this, the taste of wild strawberry, the breath moving in and out, the simple fact of being alive right now. How often do we refuse the strawberry because we are too busy worrying about the tigers? How often does something beautiful present itself, something sweet and ripe and perfect, and we cannot receive it because our minds are above or below, in the future or the past, anywhere but here where the sweetness is actually available? Your own life is full of strawberries, small moments of unexpected beauty, kindness, grace. A child's laugh, sunlight through leaves, the smell of rain, the warmth of tea, the softness of your pillow, the miracle of your own breathing, happening without effort, without thought, keeping you alive moment after moment. But the tigers are there too, above and below, and the mice are always gnawing. And if you wait for a time when there are no tigers, when the mice stop their work, when everything is safe and secure and certain you will never taste the strawberry, the teaching is not to ignore the tigers. The teaching is not to pretend the mice are not there. The teaching is to acknowledge it all, to see it clearly, and then to pluck the strawberry anyway, to taste it fully, to receive the gift that this moment offers, even if this moment also contains difficulty, even if the situation is impossible, even if death is certain. Because here is the secret that the man discovered hanging from his vine: death is always certain. The tigers are always there, above and below. The mice are always gnawing away at time. This is the human condition, for all of us, always. We are all hanging from a vine being eaten away by day and night. None of us will escape. The question is not whether we will fall, but whether we will taste the strawberry before we do. Right now, as you lie here in darkness, your own body relaxing into rest, you are that man on the vine. Above you, all your worries about tomorrow, about next week, about what might happen, about how things might go wrong. Below you, all your regrets about yesterday, about last year, about what you said or did not say, about opportunities missed and mistakes made. And the present moment, this breath, this softness, this quiet being eaten away by time, second by second, irretrievably passing. You could spend this moment worrying about the tigers. Most people do. Or you could do what the man did, acknowledge them, yes, see them clearly, yes, and then turn your attention to what is sweet right now. The strawberry of this moment, the gift of rest, the simple pleasure of not having to be anywhere else, do anything else, solve anything else. Just this, just here, just now. Feel the softness beneath you. How sweet it is. Feel the weight leaving your body. How sweet it is. Feel the darkness holding you. How sweet it is. Feel your breathing, slow and steady. How sweet it is. All of it. The whole impossible situation of being human, of being alive, of being mortal, and yet this moment, this breath, this peace. How sweet it is. The tigers can wait. They are patient. They will get their turn eventually. The mice will continue their work. You cannot stop them and do not need to. But the strawberry is here now, ripe and red and real, and you can taste it. You can receive this moment with full attention, can let it be exactly what it is: difficult and beautiful, impossible and perfect, ending and eternal. The man hung from his vine and tasted the strawberry. And for that moment there were no tigers, or rather, the tigers did not matter. There was only sweetness, only presence, only the profound yes to life, even in the midst of life's ending. You are tasting that strawberry now, whether you know it or not. This rest, this release, this letting go into sleep, it is the strawberry offered to you in this moment. Pluck it, taste it, let it be sweet on your tongue. Let everything else, all the tigers, all the mice, all the impossibilities, let them all fade into the background while you receive what is being offered right here, right now. How sweet it is, how impossibly, perfectly, completely sweet. The strawberry dissolves on your tongue, its sweetness fading into memory, and we walk forward through another gate. Your body has grown so heavy now, so relaxed, sinking deeper with each story, each breath. This next teaching comes to us from one of Zen's most beloved figures, a monk so humble, so poor, so filled with joy that even thieves could not diminish him. His name was Ryokan, and he understood something that most people spend their entire lives forgetting, that what truly matters cannot be stolen, and what can be stolen never truly mattered. Ryokan lived in Japan during the late 1700s and early 1800s, a time of rigid social hierarchies and elaborate possessions, of status measured in silks and gold. But Ryokan owned almost nothing. He had chosen, after years of formal Zen training, not to become the head of a temple or gather students or accumulate the respect and comfort that his learning might have brought him. Instead, he returned to his home province and lived alone in a tiny hut called Gogo, and the hut of 5 footsteps, so small you could cross it in 5 paces. His hut sat halfway up a mountain, surrounded by bamboo groves and pine trees, far from the villages below. It had a thatched roof that leaked when it rained, walls made of woven bamboo that let the wind whistle through, and a floor of packed earth. Inside, he kept almost nothing: a sleeping mat, a bowl for begging, a few volumes of poetry, his monk's robes, and little else. He spent his days wandering the mountain paths, playing with village children, composing poetry, and begging for his food in the towns below. The villagers loved him for his gentleness, his playfulness, his complete lack of pretension. He was, by any conventional measure, a failure. He had no temple, no students, no security. He owned nothing of value. He had not even a lock on his door, if you could call it a door, this frame of bamboo covered with paper that slid aside when pushed. But if you had asked Ryokan whether he was poor, he might have laughed his gentle laugh and recited one of the old poems he loved. "In my hut, nothing of value. What could a thief take?" One autumn evening, Ryokan had walked down to the village to share poems with some friends. They sat together drinking tea, watching the moon rise over the mountains, speaking of beauty and impermanence and the way the seasons turn. It grew late. The moon climbed higher, full and bright, turning the world silver. Finally, Ryokan took his leave, bowing to his friends, and began the long walk back up the mountain to his hut. The path was steep, but familiar to his feet. He had walked it 1,000 times, in sun and rain, in all seasons. Tonight the moonlight made it easy, bright enough to see each stone, each root, each turn in the trail. He walked slowly, not because he was old, though he was no longer young, but because he had learned long ago that there is no destination so important it cannot be reached through mindful walking. Each step was complete in itself. Each breath was enough. When he reached his hut and slid open the paper door, he knew immediately that someone had been there. The few things he owned were disturbed, moved, searched through. His sleeping mat was pushed aside. His spare robe was gone. His begging bowl, the one thing of any small value he possessed, made of good wood and carefully lacquered, was gone too. Even his sandals, worn thin but serviceable, had been taken. A thief had come while he was away, had gone through his meager possessions looking for anything worth taking, had found almost nothing, but had taken what little there was. Ryokan stood in the doorway of his hut and looked at the small chaos left behind. Another man might have felt violated, angry, afraid. Another man might have cursed the thief, or worried about replacing what was stolen, or felt the sting of injustice. But Ryokan understood something deeper than ownership. He understood that possessions are like clouds. They gather, they disperse. They were never really ours to begin with. He looked around his hut and saw that the thief was still there, crouched in the corner, frozen with fear at being discovered. It was a young man, thin and desperate looking, clutching Ryokan's robe and bowl. Their eyes met. The young man tensed, ready to run or fight, expecting anger, expecting the old monk to shout for help or demand his things back. Instead, Ryokan smiled. "You have come so far," he said gently, "and found so little. I wish I had more to give you." He looked around the bare hut. There was truly nothing else of value, nothing else worth taking. And then Ryokan did something that the thief would remember for the rest of his life. The old monk began to remove his outer robe, the one he was wearing, the last piece of decent clothing he owned. "Here," he said, holding it out to the thief. "The night is growing cold. You will need this more than I do." The thief stared at him, unable to move, unable to understand. What kind of man offers his last robe to the person who has just robbed him? "Take it," Ryokan said, still smiling, still holding out the robe. "Please, I will be warm enough in my hut, but you have a long journey ahead of you." His voice held no sarcasm, no hidden barb, only genuine concern for the stranger who had tried to steal from him. The young thief, confused and ashamed and frightened by this unexpected kindness, grabbed the robe and fled into the night. Ryokan watched him go, disappearing down the mountain path, running as if pursued, though no one pursued him. The old monk stood in the doorway of his hut, now wearing only his thin underrobe, the autumn wind cool against his skin. He could have gone inside then, wrapped himself in a sleeping mat for warmth, settled in for the night. But instead he sat down in the doorway, looking out at the night. The moon had risen higher now, full and perfect, flooding the mountainside with silver light. It turned the bamboo groves into forests of shadow and luminescence. It painted the distant peaks with frost-colored radiance. It hung in the sky like a great pearl, like a mirror, like the eye of the universe, looking down with infinite compassion. Ryokan sat and watched the moon for a long time, feeling the cool air on his skin, listening to the wind move through the bamboo, breathing in the autumn night. And then, as was his habit, as was his gift, he composed a poem, not a poem of complaint or loss, not a poem about thieves or stolen things, but a poem about what remained, about what could not be stolen, about what was real. He wrote, "The thief left it behind, the moon at my window." Just 4 lines, 17 syllables in Japanese. A poem so simple a child could understand it, and so profound that scholars have studied it for 2 centuries. The thief left it behind the moon at my window. What the thief took was nothing. What the thief left behind, what the thief could not take, what remained after everything steel-able had been stolen, that was everything. The moon. Beauty itself. The cool air. The sound of wind in bamboo. The vast silence of the mountain night. The capacity to sit and notice and receive. The ability to write poetry. The freedom from attachment that made robbery feel like nothing more than clouds rearranging themselves. The peace that comes from knowing, truly knowing, that you cannot lose what you never owned, and you always own what cannot be taken. Ryokan sat in his doorway, wearing only his thin robe, possessing now even less than before, and he was completely happy. Not happy in spite of being robbed, but happy because the robbery had changed nothing that mattered. The moon shone just as brightly. The wind felt just as cool and clean. His breath moved in and out just as steadily. His heart beat just as reliably. The great mystery of existence surrounded him just as completely. In the morning, when the moon had set and the sun rose over the mountains, Ryokan would walk down to the village and beg for his breakfast. Someone would give him food. Someone else might give him a robe, hearing of his loss, or not. It did not matter. He would survive or he would not survive. The universe would continue either way. And in the meantime, there was this moment, this breath, this light dawning across the peaks. The Buddha taught something that sounds like a riddle. In the end, only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. Ryokan lived this teaching so completely that even the things that were meant for him, his robe, his bowl, his sandals, he could let go of without resistance when someone else needed them more. This is not the same as not caring. Ryokan cared deeply about many things. He cared about poetry and children, and the way moonlight falls on mountain paths. He cared about his friends in the village and the birds that visited his hut and the changing seasons. But he did not confuse caring with clinging. He did not mistake love with possession. He knew the difference between what can be held and what can only be received, moment by moment, as a gift. What in your life are you protecting like it can be stolen? What are you clutching with tight fists, believing that if you let go, you will lose something essential? Your possessions, yes, but also your plans, your expectations, your image of yourself, your need to be seen a certain way, your resentment about past wrongs, your anxiety about future disasters. All of these are things we carry as if they were precious, as if losing them would mean losing ourselves. But Ryokan, standing in his ransacked hut with almost nothing left, discovered what cannot be stolen: the moon, the capacity for wonder, the freedom that comes from traveling light, the joy that has nothing to do with accumulation, the peace that remains when everything removable has been removed. Imagine for a moment that a thief came and took everything from you, not just your physical possessions, but your reputation, your plans, your expectations, your grievances, your worries, your carefully constructed identity. Everything gone, stolen in the night while you were away from yourself. What would remain? This breath, this awareness, this capacity to notice the moon, metaphorically speaking, at your window. The basic miracle of consciousness, of presence, of being alive. The thief cannot take this. No one can. It is the one thing that is truly yours, and paradoxically, it is yours only when you stop trying to own it. Ryokan gave his last robe to the thief out of compassion, yes, but also out of understanding. He understood that the thief was truly poor in a way that Ryokan, with nothing, was not. The thief thought he needed things, thought that taking Ryokan's possessions would fill the emptiness inside him. But Ryokan knew that emptiness cannot be filled with things, only with presence, only with attention, only with the kind of wealth that looks like poverty to those who cannot see. The young thief ran down the mountain clutching stolen robes and bowls, and he was poorer than when he arrived. Ryokan sat in his doorway with even less than before, and he was richer than emperors, because he had the moon, because he had the capacity to notice the moon, because he had the freedom to let everything else go and still be completely, radiantly present. There is a Zen saying that Ryokan might have known. Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself. Things come, things go. Spring arrives, winter returns. The grass grows, the grass dies, the moon rises, the moon sets, and through it all, if you are not too busy clutching and protecting and worrying about thieves, you can sit quietly and receive it all as a gift. Ryokan eventually got another robe. Someone in the village heard about the robbery and brought him one. He accepted it with gratitude, wore it with care, and probably would have given it away just as easily if someone needed it more. He got another begging bowl too, simpler than the first, which suited him fine. He continued to live in his tiny hut, to write his poems, to play with children, to walk his mountain paths. to be ridiculously, impossibly happy with almost nothing. When he was very old, near the end of his life, he wrote another poem about his hut. All I have are the 4 bare walls of my hut and my bed of straw. But on a night like this, with the moon so bright, what more could anyone want? What more indeed? You lie here now in your own kind of hut, the shelter of this moment, this bed, this darkness. The day has tried to rob you of peace, perhaps. Worries have tried to steal your rest. The endless demands of the world have tried to take your serenity. But like Ryokan, you can notice what remains, what cannot be stolen, what is here regardless. The capacity to rest, the gift of this breath, the softness beneath you, the darkness that holds you, the miracle of consciousness relaxing into sleep. These things are yours, but only when you stop clutching them, only when you open your hands, only when you let the thieves take what they will and notice what they cannot touch. Let it go now. Let it all go. The possessions of the day, the worries, the plans, the achievements, the failures, the identity you work so hard to maintain, let them be stolen by the night. And notice what remains. Notice the moon at your window, the light that cannot be taken, the peace that was never dependent on things going your way. The thief left it behind. Everything essential, everything real, everything that matters. Sleep will come like a thief too, taking your waking consciousness, your thoughts, your control. Let it. Ryokan would smile and offer it his last robe. Offer sleep everything you have. It will give back what cannot be taken, rest, renewal, the moon of dreams shining in the darkness of letting go. How rich you are with nothing. How free you are with empty hands. How bright the moon shines when you stop looking at what was taken and start seeing what remains. The thief left it behind, the moon at your window, the peace that was always here, the rest that is yours for the receiving. The moon fades now as we move deeper into night, deeper into rest, deeper into these teachings that are not really teachings at all, but recognitions of what has always been true. Your breathing is so slow, so steady, like the breathing of the earth itself. We come now to a strange gate, one that does not open through understanding, but through the collapse of understanding, through the mind finally exhausting itself and discovering what lies beyond thinking. This is the story of a sound that is not a sound, a question that is not a question, and an answer that is no answer at all. Hakuin, the same master we met before with his 3 words, "Is that so?" was famous for many things, but perhaps most famous for a question he gave to his students. It was not a question designed to be answered with the thinking mind. It was designed, like a medicine that must taste bitter to work, to destroy the thinking mind's assumption that everything can be figured out, solved, understood through logic and reason. The question was this: what is the sound of one hand clapping? When you first hear this question, your mind immediately tries to answer it. That is what minds do. They solve, they figure, they work things out. 2 hands clapping make a sound. Everyone knows this. But one hand? Your mind starts offering possibilities. Perhaps one hand clapping against a table? But that is not one hand, that is a hand and a table. Perhaps the sound of fingers snapping? But that involves multiple fingers creating friction. Perhaps the whoosh of air as a hand moves quickly. But Hakuin did not ask about the sound of a hand moving. He asked about the sound of one hand clapping. The question seems simple. It seems like it should have an answer. And yet every answer you propose reveals itself, upon examination, to be incomplete, to be cheating somehow, to be missing the point. This is not an accident. This is the design. This question, this koan, is not meant to be answered by the part of you that thinks. It is meant to be answered by the part of you that exists before thinking, beneath thinking, beyond thinking. There was a young monk, earnest and intelligent, who came to study with Hakuin. He had spent years studying Buddhist philosophy at other temples. He could recite sutras from memory. He could debate the finer points of doctrine. He was proud of his sharp mind, his ability to understand complex ideas, his quick thinking. When Hakuin gave him the koan of one hand clapping, he thought it would take him perhaps a few days to solve. Surely someone as intelligent as he was could figure out this riddle. He sat in meditation that first night, the question turning in his mind. What is the sound of one hand clapping? He tried to visualize it. He tried to hear it in his imagination. He tried to think through the physics of sound, the nature of clapping, the meaning of oneness. By morning, he had not slept and had not found an answer, but he had several theories he wanted to test with the master. At dawn, he went to Hakuin's room for private instruction. "Master," he said, bowing deeply, "I believe I understand. The sound of one hand clapping is silence because one hand cannot make a sound by itself." He was quite pleased with this answer. It seemed profound, Zen-like, pointing to emptiness and void. Hakuin looked at him with eyes that gave nothing away. "If that were the answer," he said quietly, "I would not have needed to ask the question. Go sit more." The monk returned to his cushion, his confidence slightly dented. Perhaps the answer was more subtle. Perhaps it was about the nature of sound itself, or the interdependence of all things. He sat through the day, through another night, his mind churning, producing theory after theory, answer after answer. The next morning he returned to Hakuin. "Master, the sound of one hand clapping is the sound of everything in the universe, because all things are connected, and one hand contains all hands." This seemed even more profound than his first answer. Hakuin's face showed the slightest hint of something that might have been sadness or compassion, or both. "Go sit more." And so it went, day after day, week after week. The monk would sit with the question, produce an answer, bring it to Hakuin, and be sent back to sit more. He tried every approach his clever mind could devise. He said the sound was the sound of his own heartbeat. He said it was the sound of wind. He said it was the sound of consciousness itself. He said it was a trick question with no answer. He said it was every sound and no sound simultaneously. Each time, Hakuin would look at him with those deep, patient eyes and say, "Go sit more," or sometimes just, "No," without elaboration or explanation. The monk's frustration grew. His pride began to crack. His clever mind, which had always been his greatest asset, seemed to be his greatest obstacle. The more he thought, the further he got from whatever Hakuin wanted him to find. Months passed. The monk lost weight from the intensity of his struggle with the koan. His eyes grew hollow from lack of sleep. Other students watched him with a mixture of sympathy and relief that they had been given different questions to work with. The monk stopped joining in temple activities. He stopped eating regular meals. He sat with the question day and night, obsessed, desperate, his entire being focused on solving this impossible riddle. What is the sound of one hand clapping? The question echoed in his mind during meditation. It followed him when he walked. It whispered to him in his dreams. It became the only thing he could think about, which was, of course, the problem he was still thinking about it. Winter came to the temple, cold and severe, snow piled high in the courtyard. The monk sat in the meditation hall, shivering, his mind still churning, still trying, still producing answers that he knew, even before presenting them to Hakuin, were wrong. He was exhausted beyond measure. His mind felt like it had been ground down to nothing, like a stone worn smooth by endless water. And then, one night, or perhaps it was early morning, he had lost track. Something shifted, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say something stopped. The endless production of answers simply ceased. His mind, exhausted from months of striving, gave up. Not in defeat, not in resignation, but in a kind of collapse, like a house of cards finally falling after being stressed beyond its capacity. In that moment of the mind's collapse, in that gap where thinking stopped and had not yet started again, something became clear, not an idea, not a concept, not an answer that could be put into words, but a direct seeing, a sudden recognition, like waking from a dream and realizing you were dreaming. He stood up from his cushion, his legs shaking from cold and exhaustion, and something else, something like energy or clarity or sudden life. He walked through the snow to Hakuin's quarters. It was the middle of the night, but he did not care. He knocked on the master's door. Hakuin answered, unsurprised, as if he had been waiting. The monk stood before him, And without speaking, without explaining, he raised one hand. That was all. Just raised one hand, and in his eyes, in his presence, in his entire being, was the answer that was not an answer. Hakuin smiled, a true smile, warm and genuine. "You have heard it," he said. "It took you long enough." The monk bowed deeply, tears streaming down his face, though he could not have said whether they were tears of relief or joy or exhaustion or all of these things together. He had not found an answer. He had become the answer. Or perhaps more accurately, he had stopped being separate from the question. What is the sound of one hand clapping? To tell you the answer in words would be to miss the point entirely, would be like trying to describe the taste of honey to someone who has never tasted sweetness. The answer is not in the thinking. The answer is in the direct experience of what remains when thinking stops. But we can point toward it the way a finger points at the moon without being the moon. We can say that the sound of one hand clapping is the sound of your own nature before words. We can say it is the sound of silence that is not empty but full. We can say it is the sound of this moment before you label it, before you think about it, before you try to understand it. When you stop trying to figure out what the sound of one hand clapping is, when you stop producing answers and simply listen with your whole being, you might hear it. It is not silence and it is not sound. It is what both silence and sound arise from. It is what you are before you think about what you are. The Buddha said, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." But even this can be misunderstood by the thinking mind, which tries to concentrate, tries to be present, tries to achieve presence through effort. The sound of one hand clapping points to something prior to trying, prior to effort, prior to the one who would concentrate. There is a famous Zen saying that goes, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." On the surface, nothing changes. The same activities, the same life. But everything is different because the one doing the chopping and carrying has heard the sound of one hand clapping. They have stopped being separate from their life. They have stopped standing outside experience, commenting on it, trying to improve it, trying to understand it. They have become the chopping, the carrying, the sound, the silence. The monk who struggled with Hakuin's koan learned something that cannot be taught but only discovered. He learned that the thinking mind, no matter how clever, cannot grasp truth, because thinking is always about truth, always separate from truth, always standing at a distance and trying to understand. But truth is not something to understand, it is something to be, or rather, it is what you already are when you stop trying to be anything else. As you lie here now, in the darkness, your mind slowly releasing its grip on the day, you are close to hearing the sound of one hand clapping, closer than you might think. When the voice in your head that narrates everything finally grows quiet, when the thinker stops thinking and there is just breathing, just presence, just this moment, without commentary, that is when you hear it, not with your ears, not with your thinking mind, but with something deeper, something that was there before you learned language, before you developed a self-concept, before you started dividing the world into subject and object, self and other, sound and silence. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Listen now, not to the sounds around you, though those are here too, not to the thoughts in your mind, though those may still be drifting through like clouds. Listen to what is listening, notice what is noticing. Be aware of awareness itself. This is not another puzzle to solve. This is an invitation to stop solving, stop figuring, stop trying to get somewhere other than exactly where you are. The sound of one hand clapping is the sound of your life before you label it, before you judge it, before you compare it to how you think it should be. Can you hear it? It is not far away. It is not in some special state you need to achieve. It is here, now, in the simple fact of being aware, of being present, of being alive in this moment. The thinking mind cannot hear it because the thinking mind is too loud, too busy, too certain. It knows what a sound should sound like. But you, right now, sinking into sleep, your thinking mind growing quiet, your clever answers exhausted, your need to understand finally relaxing you, are in the perfect position to hear it, not to understand it, not to explain it, not to grasp it with concepts, but to hear it, to be it, to recognize it as what you have always been beneath all the thinking and striving and trying to figure things out. The monk spent months struggling with the koan, and perhaps you have spent years struggling with the koan of your own life, trying to figure out what it means, what you are supposed to do, how you are supposed to be. And perhaps, like the monk, your thinking mind needs to exhaust itself, needs to give up, needs to collapse before the simple truth can be recognized. What is the sound of one hand clapping? It is the sound of this breath before you think breath. It is the sound of this moment before you think moment. It is the sound of you before you think me. It is what remains when all the answers fall away and only the question remains, and then the question falls away too, and there is just this, just here, just now. Hakuin gave this koan to his students not to confuse them, but to liberate them. Not to make them think harder, but to help them think less. Not to achieve some special state, but to recognize the ordinary state they have been in all along, beneath all the thinking, beneath all the striving, beneath all the trying to become something they already are. And now, as sleep comes to claim your waking consciousness, as your thinking mind finally surrenders to the darkness, as your clever answers dissolve into nothing, now you can hear it. The sound of one hand clapping, the sound of being without becoming, the sound of presence without effort, the sound of you just as you are before you think about it. Listen, not with effort, not with trying. Just listen as you would listen to rain falling, or wind moving through trees, or your own heart beating. Listen to the listening. Be aware of the awareness. Rest in the resting. There. Can you hear it? The sound that is no sound. The answer that is no answer. The truth that cannot be spoken but only lived, only breathed, only surrendered into. The monk heard it and wept. You are hearing it now and drifting into sleep. And there is no difference between these two things. Both are the same surrender. Both are the same letting go. Both are the same recognition of what was always here, waiting beneath the noise of thinking, beneath the struggle to understand. The sound of one hand clapping, the sound of you falling into sleep, the sound of peace, the sound of home. The sound fades into silence, and the silence itself becomes a kind of sound, and you float in the space between, neither awake nor asleep, neither trying nor resisting. We approach now perhaps the most famous koan in all of Zen, a question so simple a child could ask it, and so profound that it has puzzled and awakened seekers for over 1,000 years. This is a story about a dog, a master, and the single syllable that contains everything and nothing. The year was somewhere in the 8th century in China, in a monastery where monks practiced with fierce dedication under the guidance of a master named Joshu. His name is sometimes written as Zhaoju, and he lived to be 120 years old, teaching until his final breath. He was known for his directness, his refusal to waste words, his ability to cut through complexity with the simplest possible response. Where other masters might give long explanations, Joshu would offer one word, one gesture, one silence that contained more than volumes of scripture. Joshu had studied the Buddha's teachings deeply. He knew that the Buddha had proclaimed that all sentient beings possess Buddha nature, that fundamental awakeness, that essential clarity, that basic goodness that exists in everything that lives and breathes and experiences. A dog has Buddha nature. A cat has Buddha nature. A bird, a fish, an insect, a human being all possess this basic nature that is already awake, already complete, already whole. This was not merely philosophy for the Buddha, this was the foundation of everything. If all beings have Buddha nature, then all beings are fundamentally worthy of respect, fundamentally capable of awakening, fundamentally whole, despite all appearances of brokenness. Liberation is not about acquiring something you lack, but recognizing something you have always possessed. One day, a monk approached Joshu in the monastery courtyard. It was an ordinary day, neither special nor significant, the kind of day when dust motes drift in afternoon light and the sound of birds fills the air. The monk had been studying, had been sitting in meditation, had been pondering the teachings, and a question had formed in his mind, a question that seemed simple and straightforward. The monk bowed to Joshu and asked, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" It was, on the surface, an easy question. According to everything the Buddha taught, the answer should be yes. Of course a dog has Buddha nature. All sentient beings have Buddha nature. The scriptures are clear on this point. Any student who had spent even a short time studying Buddhism would know the correct answer. But Joshu did not give the correct answer. He looked at the monk, and from his mouth came a single syllable, a word that has echoed through Zen practice for over 1200 years, mu. In Japanese, mu means no, or nothing, or without, or negation itself. It is the opposite of yes. It is the denial. It is the word that closes doors rather than opening them. Joshu looked at this monk who asked whether a dog has Buddha nature, and he said in effect, number. But how could this be? How could Joshu, a master who knew the teachings perfectly, who had devoted his entire long life to practice and realization, contradict the Buddha? How could he say that a dog does not have Buddha nature when the Buddha clearly taught that all beings possess it? The monk stood there, confused, his question unanswered, or perhaps answered in a way that made no sense. And Joshu walked away, his one syllable hanging in the air like the sound of a bell that continues to vibrate long after it has been struck. This exchange, this simple question and this impossible answer, became one of the most important koans in all of Zen Buddhism. It became the first case in the famous collection called the Gateless Gate. It became the koan that thousands upon thousands of students have wrestled with, struggled with, been baffled by, been transformed by. What did Joshu mean? If you try to figure this out with your thinking mind, you will fail. You will produce theories and interpretations and clever explanations, and all of them will miss the point. Because Joshu was not making a philosophical statement, he was not disagreeing with the Buddha. He was offering something that cannot be grasped by the grasping mind. Let us imagine a student who receives this koan from her teacher. Let us call her Keiko, a young woman who came to the monastery seeking clarity, seeking peace, seeking some answer to the fundamental question of what it means to be alive. Her teacher gives her the koan. Joshu was asked if a dog has Buddha nature. He answered, mu. What is this mu? Keiko begins, like all students, by trying to understand it intellectually. She reads commentaries. She learns that mu can mean no, or nothing, or negation. She learns about Buddha nature, about emptiness, about the teachings on original enlightenment. She develops theories. Perhaps Joshu was pointing to emptiness, that even Buddha nature is empty of inherent existence. Perhaps he was negating the question itself, showing that Buddha nature cannot be possessed or not possessed. Perhaps he was demonstrating that words and concepts fail when pointing to ultimate truth. She brings these ideas to her teacher, who listens patiently and then says, "Show me mu. Don't explain it. Don't tell me about it. Show me mu with your whole being." Keiko returns to her meditation cushion, frustrated. How can she show something she does not understand? How can she demonstrate mu when she does not know what it is? She sits with the koan day after day. She says mas silently to herself with each breath. She tries to become ma, whatever that means. But there is always the separation. There is Keiko and there is ma, and she is trying to grasp one with the other. Weeks pass, months pass. The koan becomes like a stone in her chest, heavy and immovable. She cannot solve it, and she cannot abandon it. It follows her everywhere. When she eats, she tastes mu in her food. When she walks, her feet strike the ground with the rhythm of mu. When she lies down to sleep, mu is the last thing in her mind and the first thing when she wakes. The thinking mind hates this. The thinking mind wants answers, wants resolution, wants to check this item off the list and move on to the next thing. But mu refuses to be understood, refuses to be grasped, refuses to become clear through thinking about it. One day, Keiko is working in the monastery garden, pulling weeds in the hot sun. Her mind is tired from sitting, tired from struggling with the koan, tired from trying and failing and trying again. She reaches for a weed, and as her hand grasps the plant, as she pulls and feels the roots resist and then release from the earth, something happens. There is no thought. There is no keiko grasping. There is no mal being grasped. There is just grasping, just pulling, just the direct experience of this moment without any separation between experiencer and experienced. And in that gap where thinking stopped, in that moment of pure presence, mu is not understood but realized, not as an idea, not as a concept, but as the direct taste of reality before it is divided into subject and object, self and other, yes and no. She drops the weed and runs to her teacher. When he sees her face, he knows immediately that something has shifted. "Show me mu," he says. And Kaiko, without hesitation, without thinking, without trying to demonstrate anything, simply lives mu in that moment. Perhaps she shouts, perhaps she strikes the floor, perhaps she laughs or weeps or stands in perfect silence. The specific action does not matter. What matters is that it comes from the place before separation, from the source before thinking, from the mu that is not intellectual understanding, but direct being. Her teacher nods. "Tell me," he says, "does a dog have Buddha nature?" And Keiko, from that same place of direct knowing, might answer, "Ma," with her whole body, her whole being, not as negation, but as absolute affirmation of something that cannot be affirmed or denied because it precedes affirmation and denial. You see, Joshu's ma was not really na. It was not really a negation of the dog's Buddha nature. It was a pointing beyond the dualistic thinking that creates questions like, does it have or does it not have? Buddha nature is not something you have or do not have. It is not a possession. It is not a quality that can be present or absent. It is what you are before you ask the question. When the monk asked, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" he was thinking dualistically. He was separating the dog from Buddha nature, imagining them as two things that could be in relationship, subject and object, possessor and possessed. This way of thinking, this habitual division of reality into separate pieces, is precisely what obscures Buddha nature. Joshu's mum cuts through that dualistic thinking like a sword. It does not say yes and it does not say no. It says, stop thinking in terms of yes and no. It says, your question is based on a false assumption. It says mu, not as negation, but as the sound that shatters the conceptual framework that makes the question seem meaningful. The Buddha taught that all beings have Buddha nature, yes, but Buddha nature is not something beings have the way they have 4 legs or fur or teeth. Buddha nature is what beings are, what reality is, what this moment is before you divide it into pieces and label the pieces and ask whether this piece has that piece. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Mu? The question dissolves. The one asking dissolves. The dog dissolves. Buddha nature dissolves. What remains is just this. The barking, the breathing, the being, the immediate, is ness of reality before thought carves it into separate things. As you lie here now, sinking deeper into rest, you might notice that you too are mu. Not that you understand mu, but that you are becoming mu as thinking grows quieter. The separation between you and the darkness, between you and the bed, between you and the breath, this separation exists only in thought. When thought quiets, what remains? Mu. Not as a concept, not as an answer, but as the direct experience of being before the mind splits it into subject experiencing object. You are not having rest. You are rest. You do not have peace. You are peace. You do not have Buddha nature. You are Buddha nature, and Buddha nature is you, and these are not two things. This is what the koan is designed to reveal, not through explanation, no explanation will ever capture it, but through exhausting the explaining mind, through wearing down the thinking that believes reality can be grasped through concepts, through creating such confusion that the mind finally gives up. And in that giving up, reality reveals itself as it has always been. Joshu lived to be 120 years old, and until his dying day, students came to ask him questions. Sometimes he would answer with elaborate responses, sometimes with a single word, sometimes with silence. Sometimes he would walk away without saying anything at all, each response perfectly calibrated to what that particular student needed in that particular moment. But Mu became his most famous answer, the answer that is not an answer, the teaching that is not a teaching, the word that destroys words and points beyond them to what words can never capture. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Right now, as you drift into sleep, this question might seem less important than it did at the story's beginning, or perhaps it has become more important in a different way, not as an intellectual puzzle to solve, but as a doorway to walk through. The dog outside barks, mew. The breath moves in and out, mew. The body relaxes, mew. Sleep approaches, mew. You try to stay awake to hear the end of the story, mew. You give up trying, mew. Thinking slows, mew. The separation between waking and sleeping blurs, mew. You are neither awake nor asleep, mew. You are both awake and asleep, mew. You are both awake and asleep. These categories no longer hold, mew. Everything you think you are, your name, your history, your worries, your hopes, your identity. All of this is like the monk's question, based on the assumption of separation, based on dividing reality into pieces and then trying to figure out how the pieces relate. But before the division, before the naming, before the thinking, what are you, mew? Not as denial, not as negation, but as the sound of reality before it is carved into subject and object, before it is divided into self and other, before it is separated into this and that. The Buddha said that three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Joshu added a fourth thing, mu. It cannot be hidden because it is everything. It cannot be found because it is what you are. It cannot be grasped because grasping itself is mu. Rest now in mu. Not in understanding mu, but in being mu. Let the thinking mind that wants to figure this out grow quiet. Let the one who wants to understand dissolve into sleep. Let the separation between you and this moment collapse into the immediate presence that was here before you started thinking about it. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Does this moment have peace? Do you have rest? Mu, 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 not because these things are absent, but because having and not having is the wrong framework entirely. The dog is Buddha nature barking. This moment is peace breathing. You are rest happening. Joshu walked away after saying mu, leaving the monk with his question unanswered. And now mu walks away from you, or you walk away from mu, or there is just walking, just breathing, just this moment of letting go into sleep. The gateless gate opens. Mu is the key that is no key. Mu is the answer that is no answer. Mu is the sound of one hand clapping, the moon the thief left behind, the strawberry between the tigers, the cup emptying, the stone rolling into the valley. Mu, just mu, always mu, only mu, only mu, never mu, forever mu. Sleep now. Mu is sleeping. Mu is you. You are mu. This is mu. Mu is this. Mu. Your mind has grown so quiet now, like a pond after wind has passed, like sky after clouds have dissolved. 7 gates behind us, and you have traveled so far while lying perfectly still. This next teaching comes to us on the wings of wild geese. Those ancient travelers who know without maps where to go, who fly in perfect formation without a leader, who call to each other across vast distances in a language that needs no translation. This is a story about presence, about what is always here, and about the habit of living in our thoughts instead of in our lives. In 8th century China, there lived a Zen master named Basel, sometimes called Mazu Dawi, a man so powerful in his presence that it was said when he walked, the earth trembled, and when he shouted, students would be enlightened on the spot. He had a young student named Hyakujol, earnest and sincere, who had been studying with him for several years. Hyakujo was diligent in his practice, sitting long hours in meditation, studying the sutras, serving his teacher with devotion. But like many students, he lived more in his thoughts about Zen than in the direct experience of it. One autumn afternoon, when the air held that particular clarity that comes just before winter, when the light turns golden and slants at angles that make everything seem both more vivid and more ephemeral, Baso and Hyakujo were walking together through the monastery grounds. It was not a formal teaching walk, not a ceremonial occasion, just two men walking side by side in companionable silence, their feet finding the path without thought, their breathing synchronized with their steps. Above them, the sky was vast and blue, that deep autumn blue that seems to go on forever. And across that sky, a formation of wild geese flew, their wings beating in rhythm, their calls echoing down to the earth below. The sound of wild geese is one of the most evocative sounds in nature, plaintive and beautiful, speaking of journeys and seasons and the great migrations that happen whether humans notice them or not. Baso stopped walking. He looked up at the geese, their V formation moving steadily southward, already small in the distance but still visible, still calling. Hyakujo stopped beside him, also looking up, watching the geese with appreciation. There was something moving about the sight, the wildness of it, the freedom, the way these birds knew exactly where to go and went there without hesitation or doubt. After a moment of watching together, Baso turned to his student and asked, in that casual tone teachers use when they are about to spring a trap, "What is that?" Hyakujo glanced at his teacher, slightly puzzled by such a simple question. "Wild geese, master," he answered. It was obvious. What else could they be? Their calls still echoed faintly in the distance. Baso nodded slightly, said nothing, and continued watching the sky. The geese flew on, growing smaller, their formation still perfect, their calls growing fainter. After another moment, when the geese had flown quite far and were now just small specks against the blue, Baso asked another question, his voice still casual, still conversational. "Where have they gone?" Again Hyakujo answered what seemed obvious. "They have flown away, master." He was watching the distant specks, watching them disappear into the vastness of the autumn sky. His mind was following the geese in their flight, imagining their journey south, thinking about migration and seasons and the way all things pass. And this is when it happened. Without warning, without any change in his expression, Baso reached over and grabbed Hyakujo's nose between his fingers and twisted it sharply, painfully. Hyakujo cried out in surprise and pain, his eyes watering, his hand flying up to his throbbing nose. The pain was immediate and undeniable, driving every thought of wild geese and autumn sky from his mind. There was only this, the sharp, shocking pain in his nose, the pressure of his teacher's fingers, the immediate, undeniable reality of this moment. Baso released his nose and said, very quietly, very clearly, "How could they have flown away? They have been here from the beginning." And in that moment, with tears in his eyes from the pain, with his nose still throbbing, with every thought of past and future shocked out of him by the sudden violence of his teacher's action, Hyakujo understood, not with his thinking mind, not through reasoning or analysis, but with his whole being, he understood what Baso was pointing to. The geese had not gone anywhere, or rather, they had flown south, yes, but presence itself, the immediate, undeniable reality of this moment, had not gone anywhere. When Hyakujo said, "They have flown away," he was living in thought, in concept, in the mental story about what was happening, rather than in what was actually happening. His attention had followed the geese into the distance, into the past, into memory and imagination. He had left the present moment and begun living in his thoughts about the present moment. But when Baso twisted his nose, there was no escape into thought. There was only the immediacy of sensation, the undeniable reality of now. The pain brought him crashing back into his actual experience, into the moment that never leaves, into the presence that is always here regardless of what is present within it. The geese flew across the sky. That was here. The geese flew into the distance. That was here. The geese disappeared from view. That was here. Hayakujo thinking about the geese flying away. That was here. Baso twisting his nose. That was here. The pain, the tears, the sudden understanding. All here. Always here. Never anywhere but here. They have flown away, Hayakujo had said. But this was a thought, a story, a conceptual overlay on direct experience. In direct experience, in the raw immediacy of reality before thought labels it, nothing ever flies away. There is only this moment, forever arriving, forever present, forever new. The content changes, geese appear, geese disappear, pain arises, pain fades. But the here-ness, the now-ness, the immediate presence of experience itself never goes anywhere. Hayakujo stood there with his hand on his nose, tears in his eyes, and something broke open in him. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say something that had been artificially closed, suddenly opened. The habit of living in thought, of narrating experience rather than experiencing it, of following mental stories about what was happening instead of meeting what was actually happening. This habit momentarily dissolved, and in its absence he discovered what had been here all along. He was awake, not awake in some special spiritual sense, but simply awake to this moment, to the blue sky, to the autumn air, to the fading pain in his nose, to the sound of his own breathing, to the feeling of the ground beneath his feet. The geese had flown away, yes, but he had not flown away. The moment had not flown away. Presence had not flown away. Reality was still here, had never left, could never leave. Baso watched his student's face change, watched understanding dawn like sunrise spreading across a landscape. He had taught this way many times. Sudden, shocking, physical, immediate. Words could be evaded. Concepts could be analyzed and understood intellectually while missing the point entirely. But pain, surprise, the shock of the immediate, these could not be evaded. These demanded presence. From the beginning, Baso said again, his voice gentle now, nothing has ever flown away. You fly away. You leave this moment and go chasing after geese in your mind, following them south, imagining their journey, telling yourself stories about what has happened and what is happening and what will happen. But reality itself never leaves. It is always only this, exactly this, right here, right now. Hyakujo bowed deeply, his hand still on his nose, which would be sore for days afterward, a constant reminder of this teaching. Every time he touched his nose, he would remember the wild geese and the sudden pain and the understanding that came through it. He would remember that presence is not something to achieve or attain or reach through effort. It is simply what remains when you stop flying away in your thoughts. Think now about your own wild geese, the things your attention follows into the distance while you abandon the present moment. Worries about tomorrow, those are wild geese flying south in your mind. Replays of yesterday's conversation, wild geese flying north in your memory. Plans and schemes and hopes and fears, whole flocks of wild geese that you watch and follow and chase in your thoughts, while missing the immediate reality of this breath, this sensation, this moment, exactly as it is. We spend most of our lives like Hayakujo, before his nose was twisted, watching the geese fly away, following them in our minds, living in the story of what is happening, rather than in what is actually happening. Our attention flies away, chasing thoughts about past and future, and we do not notice that in doing so, we have left the only place where we actually exist, the only time that is actually real. The present moment is not one moment among many moments. It is not a slice of time that comes and then goes to make room for the next slice. The present moment is all there is. Everything that has ever happened, happened in the present moment. Everything that will ever happen in the present moment. The past is a memory arising now. The future is an imagination arising now. Even the thought, I am not present, is arising in presence. This is what Baso was pointing to when he said the geese have been here from the beginning. Not that the physical geese did not fly south, they did, but the here-ness, the presence, the immediate reality, this did not go anywhere. This cannot go anywhere. Where would it go? Everything is already here. You might object, surely things change. Surely the past is different from the future. Surely there is time, there is movement, there is coming and going. Yes, within the dream of time, within the conventional reality we navigate daily, things do change. The geese do fly south. People are born and die, seasons turn. This is not denied. But the changing happens within something that does not change. The movement happens within stillness. The coming and going happens within what never comes and never goes. When Hyakujo said, "They have flown away," he was identifying with the changing content, the geese, the movement, the coming and going. When Baso twisted his nose, he was forced to identify with the unchanging context, the awareness in which all change appears, the presence that all experience arises within, the here-ness that contains all locations. As you lie here now, your thoughts are like wild geese flying across the sky of your mind. Worries about work, there goes a flock, flying south. Memories of the day, another flock, flying north. Plans for tomorrow, a whole V formation, calling as they go. And you, like Hyakujo, might be watching them, following them with your attention, your consciousness flying away with each thought, leaving this moment to chase thoughts about other moments. But where have you actually gone? Nowhere. The thoughts arise here, the watching happens here. Even the sense of being distracted, of having wandered off, arises here in present awareness. You cannot actually leave the present moment because there is nowhere else to go. The present moment is not a location in time. It is the space in which time appears. Baso's teaching was not subtle. It was shocking, physical, immediate. He did not give Hyakujo a philosophical explanation of presence. He forced him into presence through pain. And while I am not suggesting you should twist your own nose, there is something to learn from this directness. The path back to presence is not through more thinking, more understanding, more conceptual knowledge about the importance of being present. The path back is simply noticing right now that you are here, that this breath is happening, that these sensations are arising, that awareness is aware. You do not need to understand this. You need only to notice it. And when you notice that your attention has flown away with the wild geese of your thoughts, you do not need to criticize yourself or try harder to be present. You simply notice, oh look, I have been following thoughts, and in that very noticing, you are present again. The geese can fly wherever they want. Let them go. Let them fly south for the winter. You stay here. This is not a practice of effort. This is a practice of release. You do not make yourself present. You simply stop flying away. You let the geese go. You let the thoughts come and go without climbing aboard and flying away with them. You rest as the sky in which the geese fly, rather than as the geese themselves. Hyakujo never forgot that autumn afternoon, the wild geese calling overhead, his teacher's sudden violence, the pain that brought him crashing into now. Years later, when he became a master himself, when students came to him seeking teaching, he would sometimes tell this story. He would describe the geese, the question, the answer, the twisted nose. And sometimes, when a student gave a particularly abstract or conceptual response to a question, he would make a quick motion toward the student's nose, and the student would flinch back, suddenly present, suddenly here. Presence cannot be taught, but it can be pointed to. It cannot be achieved, but it can be recognized. It has never been absent, but it has been overlooked, ignored, abandoned in favor of thoughts about presence rather than the direct experience of it. The wild geese of your day have flown away. The conversations, the activities, the tasks, the encounters, all gone south into memory. And tomorrow's wild geese have not yet arrived, still somewhere north in the future, not yet here. Between the geese of yesterday and the geese of tomorrow, there is only this breath, this darkness, this softness, this moment of rest. How could anything have flown away? Where could it go that is not here? The form changes, but the formless remains. The content shifts, but the context is still. The wild geese fly, but the sky does not move. You are the sky. Let the geese fly. They know where they are going, and they do not need you to follow them in your thoughts. Rest here, in this unchanging presence, in this eternal now, in this place that is not a place, and this time that is not a time, but simply the isness of reality, before you divide it into past and future, here and there, me and not me. Beiso walked on after twisting his student's nose, and Hyakujo walked beside him, awake now, present now, no longer chasing geese in his mind. The afternoon deepened into evening. The air grew cooler. Somewhere to the south, the wild geese continued their journey, and in the monastery, in the walking, in the breathing, in the immediate, undeniable here-ness of two men walking in autumn twilight, nothing had ever flown away. Nothing has ever flown away from you either. Rest in that knowing. Sleep in that presence. Let the wild geese of thought fly where they will. You stay here, in this moment, in this peace, in this endless, beginningless now. The geese are gone. The geese were never here. You are gone. You were always here. All of these are true, and none of these are true. And the truth itself is flying south for the winter, and the truth itself has never moved. Rest now. Here. Always here. Only here. Forever here. The geese have flown, and yet nothing has moved, and in this paradox you rest, breathing softly, your awareness like still water reflecting moonlight. We come now to a teaching about endings, about letting go, about the fundamental truth that runs through everything like a river through a landscape. The truth that nothing lasts, nothing remains the same. Everything is always changing, always passing, always dissolving back into the mystery from chi, it came. This is a story of fire and ashes, of loss and freedom, of what remains when everything burns away. The Buddha spoke often about impermanence, about anicca, the Pali word that means change, flux, the constant arising and passing of all phenomena. He taught that all conditioned things, meaning everything that comes into being through causes and conditions, which is essentially everything, are impermanent. Not just that they will eventually end, but that they are ending right now, moment by moment, never the same, even for an instant. The river you step into is not the same river. The person who steps is not the same person. Everything flows, everything changes, nothing can be held. And the Buddha's final words spoken to his disciples as he lay dying under the sala trees were these: all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your own salvation with diligence. Even in his last breath, he was teaching this fundamental truth that everything passes, including teachers, including teachings, including the body lying there about to become a corpse. Do not cling to me, he was saying. Do not cling to anything. Everything you try to hold will slip through your fingers like water. The only way forward is to understand this deeply, to accept this completely, to build your life on this truth rather than in denial of it. There is a story, passed down through generations of Zen students, about a monastery that burned. The details vary in different tellings. Sometimes it is in China, sometimes in Japan, sometimes the time period is specified, and sometimes it floats in that timeless zone of teaching stories. But the essential elements remain constant: a monastery, a master, students, and fire. The monastery was beautiful, let us say. It had taken generations to build, each building constructed with care and precision. The meditation hall with its polished floors and ancient beams. The library housing sutras copied by hand over centuries. Scrolls of inestimable value containing teachings that could not be replaced. There was a garden designed for contemplation, with stones placed just so. Paths that curved in harmonious lines. Trees planted by monks long dead whose names were remembered in the planting. There were living quarters, simple but well made. A kitchen where countless meals had been prepared in silence and mindfulness. A bell tower where the great bronze bell had called practitioners to meditation for 200 years. Into this monastery had gone the work of countless hands, the devotion of countless hearts, the accumulated effort and love and dedication of generations. It was not just a building, it was a physical manifestation of practice, a container for awakening, a place where the Dharma lived in wood and stone, and the bodies of those who practiced there. One autumn night, when the air was dry and the wind blew steady from the west, a fire started. Perhaps a lamp was knocked over. Perhaps a coal from the kitchen hearth rolled out onto a wooden floor. Perhaps lightning struck despite the clear sky. The cause does not matter. What matters is that fire found fuel, and fuel fed fire, and within minutes the flames were spreading, leaping from building to building, consuming everything they touched. The monks woke to smoke and heat and the terrible sound of burning. They rushed from their rooms into chaos and light. The night sky turned orange, flames reaching toward the stars. The master emerged from his quarters and saw immediately that the fire was beyond control. The wind was too strong, the buildings too close together, the flames too hungry. There would be no saving the monastery. It would burn until only ashes remained. Some of the younger monks panicked, running toward the buildings with buckets of water, thinking to fight the fire, to save what could be saved. But the master's voice cut through the roar of flames. Let it burn. Gather in the courtyard away from the buildings. Save yourselves. Everything else is already gone. The monks obeyed, gathering in the open space as the master commanded, watching their monastery burn. The meditation hall caught fire, the ancient beams crackling and groaning as they were consumed, the roof collapsing inward in a shower of sparks that rose like prayers toward the dark sky. The library burned, 2 centuries of irreplaceable sutras curling and blackening and turning to ash, all that accumulated wisdom becoming smoke. The living quarters burned, the kitchen burned, the bell tower burned, and as it collapsed, the great bronze bell fell and rang one last time, a deep tone that echoed across the valley like a final teaching. The monks stood and watched, some weeping, some standing in shocked silence, all of them watching the destruction of their home, their practice place, the physical container of their spiritual lives, everything they had worked to maintain, everything that had been entrusted to their care, everything that had seemed so solid and permanent, all of it dissolving into flame and smoke and ash. The master sat down on the ground in the courtyard, his face illuminated by the firelight, completely calm. Around him, the monastery continued to burn, the heat intense even at a distance, the sound like a living thing, hungry and consuming. One of the senior monks, tears streaming down his face, approached the master and prostrated himself. "Master," he said, his voice breaking, "everything is destroyed. The meditation hall where we practiced for years, the library with its irreplaceable texts, the garden that took a lifetime to perfect. All our work, all our efforts, generations of dedication, all gone. What will we do? How can we continue? This is a catastrophe beyond measure." The master looked at the burning monastery, then at the distraught monk before him, then up at the sky where the smoke was drifting eastward, obscuring some stars while revealing others. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, almost amused. "Good," he said. "Now we can see the moon clearly." The monk stared at his teacher, unable to comprehend. Good? How could this devastation be good? How could the master sit here calmly while everything burned, while centuries of effort turned to ash, while their entire world collapsed into ruin? But the master simply pointed upward. The moon had risen, full and bright, and with the buildings gone, with the trees that had stood around the monastery consumed by fire, with everything that had obscured the view burned away, the moon hung in the sky with perfect clarity, bright and beautiful and completely indifferent to the drama unfolding below. "We built all of this," the master said, gesturing toward the burning ruins, "and it was beautiful, and it was useful, and we practiced well within these walls. But did you think it would last forever? Did you believe that wood and stone were exempt from the truth we study every day in meditation, that all things arise and all things pass away?" He stood up, brushing ash from his robes. Around them, the fire was beginning to die down, having consumed most of what could burn, now feeding on what remained. Dawn was still hours away, but the firelight made everything visible, stark and clear. "We have been practicing impermanence in the meditation hall," the master continued, sitting quietly while we watched thoughts arise and pass away, watching sensations come and go, studying the sutras that teach us nothing lasts. "But this," He gestured toward the smouldering ruins. This is impermanence teaching us directly. This is the Dharma preaching with flames instead of words. This is reality showing us what we have been studying in theory. Another monk, younger, spoke up, his voice confused. But Master, the sutras are gone. The ancient texts, the commentaries, the teachings written by masters long dead, how will we study without them? The master smiled. The sutras were never in the scrolls. The scrolls were just paper and ink. The real sutras are written in the nature of reality itself. This fire is a sutra. This moon is a sutra. Your tears are a sutra. Everything that arises teaches the truth if you are willing to learn from it. He paused, looking at each of the monks gathered in the courtyard, their faces smudged with smoke and ash, their eyes reflecting firelight and confusion and slowly dawning understanding. For years you have been practicing in that meditation hall, sitting on those cushions, following those forms, as if the practice lived in the building. But the building was just a building. The practice lives here. He touched his chest, and here he touched his head, and here he gestured to the space between them, the air they shared, the moment they inhabited together. The fire cannot burn these things. The fire cannot destroy what is real. As he spoke, the truth of his words began to settle into the gathered monks like rain into dry earth. Everything they had been attached to, everything they had believed was necessary for their practice. Everything they had worked to maintain and preserve, all of it was gone or going, dissolving into smoke and ash. And yet they were still here. They were still breathing. They were still aware. The capacity for awakening had not burned. Presence had not been consumed. The fundamental nature of mind remained untouched by flames. We will rebuild, the master said, or we will not rebuild. We will gather new sutras, or we will practice without sutras. We will construct new buildings, or we will sit under the sky. None of this matters as much as you think it does. What matters is this. He gestured to the moment itself, to the standing together in the wake of loss, to the breathing and the being and the awareness that continued, regardless of what burned. The Buddha taught that all conditioned things are impermanent, he said, repeating those final words spoken under the sala trees. Conditioned means created, constructed, built through causes and conditions. This monastery was conditioned. We built it, therefore it could be destroyed. Your attachment to it was conditioned. You grew to love it, therefore you suffer at its loss. But what is unconditioned? What is not built and therefore cannot be destroyed? The question hung in the air like the smoke drifting eastward. Some of the monks sat down, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline of the fire giving way to the deeper exhaustion of confronting impermanence so directly. Others stood staring at the ruins, their minds working through what the master was teaching. One old monk, who had lived in the monastery for 40 years, who had swept those floors and tended that garden and sat in that meditation hall more times than could be counted, began to laugh. It started quietly, almost like crying, but grew into genuine laughter, clear and free. The other monks looked at him in surprise. Some with concern had the shock driven him mad. But the old monk was not mad. He was awake in a new way, or perhaps an old way he had forgotten. I have been dusting those sutras for 40 years, he said, still laughing, protecting them from fire and moisture and insects, treating them like they were the Dharma itself. And all along, the Dharma was here. He touched his heart, waiting for me to notice. The fire has freed me from my dusting. What a relief! The master nodded, smiling. Yes, what a relief, to finally see clearly what we have been teaching all along. Nothing lasts, nothing can be held. Everything you cling to will be taken from you, if not by fire, then by time, if not by time, then by death. The question is not how to prevent this, you cannot. The question is how to live with this truth, how to build your life on this foundation rather than on the illusion of permanence. As the night deepened and the fire burned itself out, the monks sat together in the courtyard, surrounded by ash and ruin, and something shifted in their practice. The monastery they had relied on was gone. The forms they had followed were disrupted. The comfortable routines and familiar spaces were destroyed. And in that destruction, In that stripping away of everything external, they were forced to find what was internal, what was essential, what remained when everything that could burn had burned. The Buddha's final words: work out your own salvation with diligence. You cannot rely on buildings. You cannot rely on teachers, for teachers die. You cannot rely on sutras, for sutras burn. You cannot rely on anything external, anything conditioned, anything built through causes and conditions. You can only rely on the direct investigation of reality, on the immediate experience of this moment, on the fundamental awareness that witnesses all arising and passing, but does not itself arise or pass. As you lie here now, what is burning in your life? What attachments are being consumed by the fire of change, the flame of impermanence? Perhaps relationships have ended, perhaps jobs have been lost, perhaps dreams have died, perhaps the person you thought you were has dissolved, revealing someone different underneath. This is the fire. This is impermanence teaching directly, not through words but through the actual lived experience of loss. The Master said good, because he understood that clinging to what changes causes suffering, and fire forces you to let go. The monastery burned, and in its burning, released the monks from their subtle attachments, their unconscious beliefs that practice required certain conditions, certain buildings, certain forms. What remains when everything burns? The moon remains, clearer now than before. Awareness remains, untouched by flames. The capacity for presence remains. The truth remains. These things cannot burn because they were never built. They are unconditioned, not created through causes and conditions, therefore not subject to destruction when conditions change. The monastery was eventually rebuilt, but differently, simpler, with less attachment to its permanence. The library was restored, but the monks no longer confused the scrolls with the teachings. The garden was replanted, but with the understanding that it too would one day return to wilderness. Everything rebuilt with full knowledge that it would someday burn again, or crumble, or fade, and that this was not tragedy, but simply truth. Let the fire burn now. Let the day that is ended dissolve into ash. Let the worries and plans and all the constructed things you built in your mind turn to smoke and drift away. And notice what remains: this breathing, this awareness, this presence that witnesses all burning without being burned. The monastery is gone. The moon shines clearly. All things pass. This moment is here. Everything changes. Nothing is lost. Good. Now you can see clearly. Now you can rest in what does not burn, what has never burned, what will never burn no matter how hot the flames. The fire teaches, the ashes teach, the moon teaches, sleep teaches. All conditioned things are impermanent. Rest now in the unconditioned. Let everything else burn away. The ashes settle, the smoke clears, and in the emptiness left behind, something pure remains. Your body has become so heavy now, so relaxed, as if you too are dissolving, returning to some original state before form, before name, before the long accumulation of identity. We arrive now at a teaching about merit and emptiness, about the difference between what the world values and what is actually valuable, about the impossibility of grasping the highest truth with the grasping mind. This is the story of an encounter between an emperor who thought he understood and a monk who refused to pretend. In 6th century China, during the Liang dynasty, there ruled an emperor named Wu. He was not like most emperors who came before or after him. Emperor Wu was deeply devoted to Buddhism, not merely as a political convenience or cultural ornament, but with genuine reverence and enthusiasm. He studied the sutras. He invited Buddhist teachers to his court. He built temples across his empire, magnificent structures with golden roofs and jade ornaments, places of worship that proclaimed his devotion to the Dharma for all to see. Emperor Wu did not merely build temples, he built hundreds of them. He sponsored thousands of monks, providing them with food and shelter and everything they needed to dedicate themselves to practice. He commissioned translations of Sanskrit texts into Chinese. He hosted Dharma lectures. He banned the slaughter of animals in his territories. He himself took monastic vows several times, though he always returned to his duties as emperor. By any conventional measure, Emperor Wu was the ideal Buddhist ruler, using his vast power and wealth to support the Dharma in every way he could imagine. And Emperor Wu was proud of this, not in a vulgar way, not boastfully, but with the subtle pride of the man who knows he has done good work and expects to be recognized for it. He believed, as the sutras taught, that good actions create good karma, that generosity brings merit, that supporting the Dharma would bring spiritual benefits both in this life and future lives. He had done so much for Buddhism. Surely this counted for something. Surely the scales of karma had tipped heavily in his favor. Word reached Emperor Wu that a remarkable monk had arrived from India, crossing the treacherous mountain passes, traveling the Silk Road, coming to bring the Dharma in its purest form to China. This monk's name was Bodhidharma, which means Dharma of awakening. He was said to be fierce in his practice, uncompromising in his teaching, a direct descendant of the Buddha's lineage, carrying the transmission of awakening mind to mind across generations and across continents. Emperor Wu was delighted. Finally, a truly enlightened master to whom he could demonstrate his devotion, from whom he could receive teachings, who would surely recognize and appreciate all that the emperor had done for Buddhism. He sent an invitation to Bodhidharma to visit the imperial court. Bodhidharma accepted, and the meeting was arranged with all the ceremony befitting an encounter between an emperor and a holy man. The day arrived. The palace was prepared. Incense burned in golden censers. The finest tea was ready to be served. Emperor Wu, dressed in his most elegant robes, waited in his reception hall to greet this legendary master from the West. When Bodhidharma was announced and entered the hall, the emperor stood to receive him with deep respect. Bodhidharma was not what the court expected. He was rough-looking, intense, with eyes that seemed to see through pretense to whatever lay beneath. He did not bow elaborately. He did not express gratitude for the invitation. He simply stood there, present and solid as a mountain, waiting. Emperor Wu, accustomed to deference but also genuinely seeking spiritual guidance, began the conversation with what he thought was a natural question, a question that had been forming in his mind for years, a question about the fruits of his devotion. "I have built many temples," the emperor said, trying to sound humble, but unable to keep a note of pride from his voice. "I have copied many sutras. I have fed and clothed thousands of monks. I have supported the Dharma in every way I can imagine. Tell me, what merit have I gained from all these good deeds?" It was a reasonable question from the emperor's perspective. The Buddhist teachings he had studied spoke often of merit, of the positive karma generated by virtuous actions, of the spiritual benefits that flow from generosity and devotion. He had done so much. Surely Bodhidharma would confirm that vast merit had accumulated, that the emperor's spiritual account was rich beyond measure. Bodhidharma looked at the emperor with those penetrating eyes. He did not pause to consider. He did not soften his response for the sake of diplomacy. He spoke two words that echoed through the hall like a thunderclap: no merit. The court stirred. Advisors exchanged glances. Emperor Wu's face showed confusion, then something like hurt. No merit? How could this be? He had done everything the teachings prescribed. He had been generous beyond measure. He had supported the Sangha, built temples, studied sutras. How could there be no merit in any of this? But Bodhidharma was not finished. He was not being cruel or dismissive. He was pointing to a truth that the emperor, for all his study and practice, had not yet grasped. The emperor had been doing all these good works with a calculating mind, expecting return, building up merit like a merchant accumulates gold. This was not wrong exactly, but it was not the highest understanding. It was still operating within the framework of gain and loss, accumulation and depletion, self and other. Emperor Wu, recovering from his shock, tried to understand. Perhaps he had misunderstood the question. Perhaps Bodhidharma was testing him. He asked another question, one he thought might reveal the teaching the master was offering. Then what is the highest meaning of the holy truths? This was the kind of question scholars asked. the kind of question that invited exposition of doctrine, explanation of Buddhist philosophy. Surely Bodhidharma would explain the profound teachings, would reveal the deeper meaning that the emperor was missing. Bodhidharma's answer was even more shocking than the first. Empty, nothing holy. Nothing holy. But they were discussing the holy truths, the sacred Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha himself. How could there be nothing holy? The entire Buddhist path was built on the foundation of the Four Noble Truths, the sacred insights that the Buddha had realized under the Bodhi tree. How could Bodhidharma say there was nothing holy in any of it? But again, Bodhidharma was not being nihilistic or dismissive. He was pointing beyond concepts, beyond the dualistic thinking that divides the world into holy and profane, sacred and mundane, enlightened and deluded. In the highest truth, in the direct experience of reality before it is carved up by conceptual thinking, there is no separation between holy and ordinary. Everything is empty of inherent existence. Nothing has a fixed, independent nature. Even holiness is a concept, a label, a way the thinking mind tries to grasp what cannot be grasped. The Buddha taught that the highest truth is emptiness, shunyata in Sanskrit. Not emptiness as a void or nothingness, but emptiness of inherent existence, emptiness of fixed nature. Everything arises dependent on conditions. Nothing exists independently. Nothing has a permanent, unchanging essence. This applies to tables and chairs, yes, but also to merit and sin, to holy and profane, to enlightenment and delusion. All of these are concepts, empty of inherent reality, useful in conventional truth, but dissolving when examined at the ultimate level. Emperor Wu was lost now, his framework crumbling. If there was no merit in his good deeds, if there was nothing holy in the holy truths, then what was he doing? What was the point of all his effort, all his devotion, all his study and practice? He asked one more question, perhaps hoping to find solid ground somewhere. Who is before me? This was a different kind of question, not about merit or truth, but about presence, about identity. Who are you, Bodhidharma? What kind of teacher are you? What authority do you claim? And Bodhidharma's final answer was the most devastating of all. I don't know. Not, I am Bodhidharma, the 28th patriarch of the Buddhist lineage. Not, I am an enlightened master from India. Not any claim to identity or authority or understanding. Just, I don't know. The highest wisdom expressed as not knowing. The deepest truth as the relinquishment of all claims to truth. The encounter ended there. Emperor Wu sat in silence, unable to respond, his entire framework for understanding Buddhism shattered by 3 brief exchanges. Bodhidharma left the court, crossed the Yangtze River, and made his way to Shaolin Temple, where he sat facing a wall in meditation for 9 years, establishing the Zen tradition that would flow through China and eventually to Japan and beyond. But what was Bodhidharma teaching in this famous encounter? Was he saying that Emperor Wu's good works were worthless? Was he negating the value of building temples and supporting monks? Was he dismissing the entire Buddhist tradition as meaningless? No. He was pointing beyond calculation, beyond the transactional view of spirituality that sees practice as a way to accumulate merit, the way a merchant accumulates wealth. Emperor Wu had been practicing Buddhism with the mind of gain, expecting return on his investment, building up spiritual capital. This is a valid level of practice. The Buddhist teachings do speak of merit and karma and the benefits of good actions, but it is not the highest level. At the highest level, there is no one to gain merit. There is no merit to be gained. There is only the action itself, arising and passing, empty of inherent existence. When you give without expectation of return, when you practice without goal of attainment, when you do good because good is what this moment calls for, rather than because you expect reward, this is closer to what Bodhidharma was pointing toward. No merit does not mean your actions have no consequences. It means that in ultimate truth, there is no separate self to accumulate merit, no fixed entity to receive benefit. Your good actions benefit the world, yes, but not because they accumulate in some cosmic account. They benefit because they are themselves, the benefit, the expression of wisdom and compassion, complete in the moment of their arising. Empty, nothing holy, does not mean the Dharma is meaningless. It means that holiness is not a quality that some things have and others lack. In the non-dual awareness that Bodhidharma was pointing to, there is no division between sacred and profane. Everything is already the expression of Buddha nature. The search for something holy outside of ordinary experience is itself what obscures the holiness that is always already present. I don't know does not mean ignorance. It means the relinquishment of fixed concepts about who or what you are. The thinking mind wants to pin everything down, to label it, to understand it, to grasp it. But your true nature is before thinking, before concepts, before the labels, enlightened or deluded, teacher or student, emperor or monk. Emperor Wu was attached to his identity as a great supporter of Buddhism. Bodhidharma had no attachment to being a great teacher. Emperor Wu wanted confirmation that his good works had value. Bodhidharma pointed to a value that transcends the calculating mind's ability to measure. Emperor Wu was operating within the framework of self and other, gain and loss, merit and demerit. Bodhidharma was pointing to what precedes that framework. There is a teaching that says, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. This was spoken by the Buddha, and it points to a truth that Emperor Wu had not yet grasped, that true generosity does not deplete the giver. That authentic practice is not about accumulation, but about realization of what is already complete. As you lie here now, what merit are you trying to accumulate? What good deeds are you keeping score of? What spiritual achievements are you using to build an identity, to prove your worth, to earn your place? The thinking mind wants to measure, to quantify, to know how you are doing on some imagined scale of progress. But Bodhidharma's teaching cuts through all of that. No merit, not because your efforts are worthless, but because worth itself is a concept that dissolves when you touch reality directly. You are not accumulating merit through your practice. You are not becoming more enlightened through your efforts. You are recognizing what has always been true, that your nature is already complete, already whole, already awake beneath all the layers of thinking and striving and trying to become something other than what you are. Empty, nothing holy. This very moment, with all its ordinary qualities, the softness of the bed, the darkness of the room, the breathing moving in and out, this is not less than holy. It is not moving toward holiness. It is the direct expression of holiness when you stop dividing reality into categories of sacred and mundane. Who are you? I don't know. Not the story you tell about yourself, not the accumulation of your past actions, not the identity you have constructed through years of thinking and deciding and becoming. Before all of that, before the naming and the labeling and the understanding, who are you? Bodhidharma crossed the river and left Emperor Wu to contemplate these questions. The emperor, by all accounts, spent the rest of his life trying to understand what had happened in that encounter, what he had missed, what teaching had been offered that he could not grasp with his thinking mind. Some say he eventually understood. Some say he died still puzzled. The truth is probably that understanding itself was the wrong goal, the wrong framework. Bodhidharma was not offering something to be understood, but something to be realized, not through thinking, but through the collapse of thinking, not through gaining knowledge, but through releasing the one who seeks to know. The highest truth cannot be grasped, because grasping itself is the obstacle. The holy cannot be found because the search for it implies it is somewhere other than here. Merit cannot be accumulated because the one who would accumulate it is itself empty, a concept, a construction, not ultimately real. Rest now in this emptiness that is not empty but full. Rest in this not knowing that knows everything essential. Rest in this moment that has no merit and yet contains all value. that is not holy and yet is the only holiness there is. Emperor Wu built his temples. Bodhidharma crossed his river. Both were perfect. Both were empty. Both were the Dharma teaching in different voices, different forms, different ways. And you, lying here between waking and sleeping, accumulating no merit, seeking nothing holy, not knowing who you are, you too are perfect, empty. The Dharma expressing itself as this breath, this moment, this letting go into sleep. No merit, nothing holy. I don't know. These three answers that the emperor could not understand are the three truths that set you free. Free from measuring, free from seeking, free from the burden of becoming someone other than exactly who you are in this moment. Bodhidharma walked away. The emperor sat with his confusion, and the teaching continued, continues still, will continue forever, empty and holy and unknowable, perfect in its incompleteness, complete in its imperfection. Sleep now. No merit in sleeping, nothing holy in rest. You don't know what dreams will come, and all of this is exactly right, exactly enough, exactly the Dharma teaching with silence instead of words. The emperor's questions fade into silence, leaving only the not knowing, the emptiness that is somehow full, the merit that cannot be measured. Your breathing has become so subtle now, barely a whisper, as if you are learning to breathe like sleep itself breathes. We come to a teaching about sight and blindness, about the way wisdom sometimes comes not through gathering more, but through a different kind of seeing altogether. This is a story of a Zen master who thought he was the teacher, and a blind musician who showed him what it means to truly listen. Ikkyu Sojun lived in 15th century Japan from 1394 to 1481, and he was not like other Zen masters. Where they were proper and formal, he was wild and unpredictable. Where they followed rules and maintained appearances, he broke conventions and shocked the respectable. He drank sake, visited brothels, he wrote poetry that made people blush. And yet his insight was so profound, his teaching so authentic, that even those scandalized by his behavior had to acknowledge his deep realization. Ikkyu had trained rigorously in his youth, achieving enlightenment after years of fierce practice. He became the abbot of a great temple, Daitokuji in Kyoto, but held the position for only 8 days before abandoning it in disgust at the hypocrisy and political maneuvering he found there. After that, he wandered, teaching in unconventional ways, refusing to play the role of respectable Zen master, insisting that awakening had nothing to do with robes and titles and ceremonial correctness. He was an old man when this story takes place, his hair white, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still sharp, still seeing through pretense to whatever truth lay beneath. He had spent decades teaching students, giving Dharma talks, offering koans, pointing people toward awakening. He was confident in his understanding, secure in his realization, certain that he saw clearly what most people missed. One evening in late spring, when the cherry blossoms had mostly fallen and their petals carpeted the ground like snow, Ikkyu was walking through the streets of a small town where he had been invited to give a talk. The streets were busy with people finishing their day's work, merchants closing their shops, children playing their last games before being called inside for supper. The air smelled of cooking rice and blooming wisteria. As Ikkyu walked, he heard music. Someone was playing the baiwa, a traditional Japanese lute with a sound both melancholic and beautiful, each note hanging in the air like a question that needs no answer. The music was exquisite, played with a subtlety and feeling that made Ikkyu stop and listen. This was not merely technical skill. This was music played by someone who understood something essential about sound and silence, about the spaces between notes mattering as much as the notes themselves. Ikkyu followed the sound to a small temple, barely more than a shrine, at the edge of town. Sitting on the temple steps was a man playing the baiwa, his eyes closed, his fingers moving across the strings with practiced grace. As Ikkyu approached, he realized the man's eyes were not merely closed, they were clouded, sightless. This was a blind musician, one of the traveling players who made their living performing at temples and tea houses, dependent on the generosity of those who stopped to listen. Ikkyu sat down on the steps near the musician, saying nothing, simply listening as the piece came to its completion, the final notes fading into the evening air like birds disappearing into dusk. When the music ended, the blind man sat in silence for a moment, as if listening to the resonance that remained, then turned his head slightly toward where Ikkyu sat. "Good evening, sir," the blind man said, his voice soft and courteous. "Thank you for listening." "The thanks are mine," Ikkyu replied. "Your playing is extraordinary. You play with great feeling." The blind man smiled slightly. "When you cannot see, you must learn to hear deeply. And when you hear deeply enough, music is no longer something you play, but something that plays through you." Ikkyu was intrigued. This was not the response he expected from a simple traveling musician. "You speak like someone who has studied more than music," he said. "I have studied what my blindness taught me," the man replied. "Which is to say, I have studied by releasing what I thought I knew and learning to perceive what is actually here." They talked as the evening deepened into night. The blind musician spoke of his life, how he had lost his sight as a young man to illness, how the loss had devastated him at first, how he had believed his life was over. But gradually he had discovered that sight was only one way of knowing the world, and perhaps not even the most important way. "When I had eyes," the blind man said, "I was always looking at surfaces. I saw the appearance of things and mistook that for their reality. I saw faces and thought I knew the people behind them. I saw objects and thought I understood their nature. But now, without sight, I have learned to hear what is beneath the surface. I listen to the tone of someone's voice and hear their heart. I feel the quality of silence in a room and know what is present there. I touch an object and sense its history, the hands that made it, the intention behind its creation." Ikkyu listened carefully. This was not mere philosophy. The blind man was speaking from direct experience, from a way of knowing that had been forced upon him by circumstance, but had deepened into wisdom. "Tell me," Ikkyu said, "you sit here at this temple playing music. Do you know anything of Zen, of the Buddha's teaching?" The blind man laughed softly. "I know nothing of Zen formally. I have never studied in a monastery or read the sutras, but I know something of emptiness, of impermanence, of the way things arise and pass. How could I not? Every note I play arises from silence and returns to silence. Every sound is born and dies in the space of a breath. If that is not the Dharma, then I do not know what is." "You are wiser than many who have spent years in formal study," Ikkyu said, and he meant it. There was something in this blind musician's presence, in the way he spoke and listened and existed in the world, that reminded Ikkyu of the deepest teachings, the ones that cannot be transmitted through words, but only through direct pointing, direct experience. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, and then the blind man said something that would stay with Ikkyu for the rest of his life. "Master, for I sense that you are a teacher of some kind, though you have not said so. May I share something I have noticed? Those who can see are often the most blind. They look at the world and think they know it because they can name what they see. But naming is not knowing. Labeling is not understanding. The eye sees surfaces, but it is the heart that sees truth." Ikkyu felt something shift inside him. Here he was, a renowned Zen master, famous for his insight and realization, being taught by a blind musician sitting on temple steps. And the teaching was profound, cutting to something he had perhaps forgotten in his decades of teaching others. "You are saying I am blind?" Ikkyu asked, not offended, but genuinely curious. "I am saying we are all blind in different ways," the musician replied. "You have eyes, and perhaps they show you many things. But do they show you what is most important? Do they see the invisible? Do they perceive what cannot be named or grasped or understood through thinking?" The blind man reached out and touched Ikkyu's hand gently. "Let me show you something," he said. "Close your eyes." Ikkyu, intrigued, closed his eyes. "Now," the blind man said, "tell me what you see." "I see nothing," Ikkyu replied. "Only darkness." "Look deeper. Without your eyes, what is here?" Ikkyu sat with eyes closed, attending to what was present in the absence of sight. He became aware of sounds, the wind in the trees, a dog barking in the distance, the faint sound of voices from a nearby house. He became aware of the coolness of the evening air on his skin, the solidity of the steps beneath him, the scent of incense drifting from the temple. He became aware of his own breathing, his heartbeat, the simple fact of being alive in this moment. I see, or rather, I sense many things, Ikkyu said slowly. Sound, sensation, presence. The world is here even without sight to confirm it. Yes, the blind man said, and is it less real? Is it less complete? Or is it perhaps more immediate, more direct, because you are not separating yourself from it through the distance that sight creates? Ikkyu kept his eyes closed, exploring this new way of attending to experience. He realized that when he looked at the world with open eyes, there was always a subtle separation. He was here, the world was there, and sight bridged the distance. But in darkness, with eyes closed, attending through other senses, the separation was less clear. Sound arose in consciousness, without a clear sense of outside and inside. Sensation simply appeared. The boundary between self and world became porous, permeable. This is what I have learned from blindness, the musician said softly, that seeing with eyes, we create separation. We stand apart from the world and look at it, but perceiving without sight, we participate in the world more directly. We become part of what we perceive, rather than separate from it. Ikkyu opened his eyes and looked at the blind man with new appreciation. Here was someone who had been forced by circumstance to discover what Zen masters spent decades trying to teach, that the separation between self and world is illusory, that direct experience transcends the subject-object duality, that true seeing happens when you stop standing apart and simply party, sipate, in the moment, as it is. You have taught me something important, Ikkyu said, bowing deeply. I came here thinking I was a teacher, and I find I am a student. The blind man shook his head. You are both, as we all are. I teach you what blindness taught me. You will teach me what sight has shown you. We are all teaching and learning, always, if we remain open. They talked long into the night. Master and musician, the one who had spent a lifetime studying Zen, and the one who had never heard of it, but lived its deepest truths through the simple fact of being blind in a world designed for the sighted. The blind man spoke of listening so deeply that he could hear the intention behind words, of sensing the emotional atmosphere of a room the moment he entered it, of knowing when someone was being truthful or false, not through their words, but through subtle shifts in their presence. The Buddha taught something about this, Ikkyu said. He spoke of three things that cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. You have discovered that truth reveals itself not just through sight, but through all the ways we can attend to reality. And perhaps, the blind man added, truth reveals itself most clearly when we stop trying to grasp it, when we simply open ourselves to receive what is here. When Ikkyu finally rose to leave, the night was deep and the stars were bright overhead. The blind musician could not see them, but when Ikkyu mentioned their beauty, the musician smiled and said, I can feel their light, not with my eyes, but with something deeper. The same way I can feel the presence of the Buddha, though I have never seen a statue or image of him. Ikkyu walked back to his lodging in the darkness, his mind turning over what he had learned. He had spent decades teaching others to see beyond appearances, to perceive the Buddha nature that underlies all phenomena, to recognize the emptiness that is not void but the ground of all being. And here was a blind musician who had discovered all of this not through study or meditation, but through the simple necessity of navigating a world without sight. He realized that he had become, in some ways, too confident in his understanding, too certain that his years of practice had given him complete vision. But the blind man had shown him that there are always deeper ways to see, that wisdom is not a destination reached, but a continuous opening to what is present, that the teacher who thinks he has nothing left to learn has stopped truly seeing. In the years that followed, Ikkyu often spoke of the blind musician in his Dharma talks. He told students that those with the clearest physical sight often miss what is most important, while those who cannot see with eyes sometimes see most clearly with the heart. He encouraged students to practice periods of meditation with eyes closed, Not just lowered in the usual way, but fully closed, learning to attend to reality through senses other than sight. Close your eyes, he would say, and see clearly. As you lie here now in the darkness, your eyes already closed, you are in a position to understand what the blind musician taught Ikkyu. Without sight, what do you perceive? The softness beneath you, the weight of your body, the rhythm of breathing, the subtle sounds of night, the temperature of air on your skin. All of this is here. All of this is real. All of this is the world presenting itself directly to you without the mediation of sight. And in this darkness, in this blindness that is not really blindness but a different kind of seeing, you might discover what both Ikkyu and the musician knew, that true perception happens not through the senses alone, but through the awareness that receives all sensation, that witnesses all experience, that is present before and after and during all seeing and hearing and feeling. The blind man could not see the cherry blossoms, but he could hear them falling, could smell their fading fragrance, could sense their impermanence more directly, perhaps than those who looked at them and thought, "How beautiful," without really seeing that beauty is always already passing. He could not see faces, but he heard hearts. He could not see surfaces, but he sensed depths. What are you blind to? What does your reliance on sight, literal and metaphorical, prevent you from perceiving? What would you discover if you learned to listen as deeply as the blind musician, to feel as sensitively, to attend to what is present rather than just what is visible? Close your eyes and see clearly. This is not a paradox, but a pointing to something essential. The eyes see surfaces, separations, the world divided into separate objects. But when you close your eyes and attend to direct experience, the separation softens. You do not see the breath, but you feel it happening. You do not see the peace, but you rest in it. You do not see the truth, but you are it. Ikkyu returned many times to listen to the blind musician play, and each time he learned something new, or perhaps remembered something he had always known but had forgotten in the accumulation of knowledge and the certainty of understanding. He learned that wisdom is not possession but openness, not grasping but receiving, not seeing but being seen by reality itself. The blind man played his biwa, and in each note was the teaching that cannot be spoken. That loss can become gift, that limitation can become liberation, that not seeing can become the deepest seeing of all. Rest now in your blindness. Let the darkness be your teacher. Let the absence of sight reveal the presence of something that was always here but could not be seen because you were too busy looking. Let the not seeing become seeing. Let the closing of eyes open what has never been closed. The blind man sits on the temple steps still, in memory, in teaching, in the truth that continues whether anyone perceives it or not. And you lie here in darkness, learning what he learned, discovering what Ikkyu discovered, seeing clearly with eyes closed. Listen deeply, feel truly, perceive directly. The truth is here, has always been here, will always be here, visible to those who have learned to see without eyes, to know without knowing, to rest in the darkness that contains all light. Sleep now, blind to the world of waking, open to the world of dreams, seeing nothing, perceiving everything, eyes closed, heart open. This is the teaching, this is the truth, this is the way home. The blind musician's notes fade into silence, and in that silence you have learned to hear more clearly than ever before. We arrive now at the final gate, the 12th teaching, and discover that it is not an ending at all, but a returning, a completion of the circle that reveals there was never anywhere to go, nothing to achieve, no separation between the seeking and the finding. This is the story of coming home after a long journey and discovering you never left. In the Zen tradition, there is a famous teaching told through 10 pictures called the ox-herding pictures, though sometimes they are called the 10 bulls. These images, created in 12th century China and refined over centuries, map the journey of spiritual seeking from beginning to end, or what seems like the end, until you understand what the end really means. The story begins with a young herder who has lost his ox. The ox represents true nature, Buddha nature. the essential self that was never really lost but is being forgotten, obscured by the noise and distraction of ordinary thinking and living. The first picture shows the seeker beginning to search, looking for what he has lost, not yet understanding that you cannot lose what you truly are. The subsequent pictures show the journey finding the ox's footprints, glimpsing the ox in the distance, catching the ox, taming it, riding it home, transcending even the ox until both seeker and ox disappear into emptiness, into the great void where all dualities dissolve. Many spiritual traditions would end the story there, in the transcendent emptiness, in the void beyond form, in the dissolution of all that is conditioned and constructed. But Zen does not end there. There are two more pictures, and they are perhaps the most important of all. The ninth picture shows a return to the source. Mountains are mountains again, rivers are rivers again. The world returns in all its ordinary beauty, but now seen with new eyes, perceived without the veil of separation. And the 10th picture, the final one, shows the seeker now no longer seeking returning to the marketplace with gift-bestowing hands. This final image shows an old man, fat and smiling, carrying a bag, entering the town marketplace where ordinary people go about their ordinary business, buying vegetables, selling fish, arguing about prices, carrying babies, sweeping steps, living their common everyday lives. And the enlightened one enters this marketplace not to teach, not to preach, not to demonstrate his realization, but simply to participate, to be present, to offer what needs to be offered, to help where help is needed. The caption often given to this final picture is, entering the marketplace with helping hands, or returning to the marketplace with gift-bestowing hands. The journey that began with seeking something extraordinary ends with the discovery that the extraordinary was always hiding in the ordinary, that enlightenment does not escape from the world but full participation in it, that awakening does not remove you from life but returns you to life more completely than before. Let us imagine the person in this final picture. Call him simply the traveler, for he has travelled far, though as he now knows, he has also never moved at all. He began his journey years ago, driven by a deep dissatisfaction with ordinary life, a sense that there must be something more, some deeper truth, some liberation from the suffering and confusion that seemed to permeate everything. He left his home, his family, his comfortable existence. He climbed mountains to sit with masters. He practiced meditation until his legs ached and his back screamed. He studied sutras until the words swam before his eyes. He wrestled with koans that made no sense. He endured cold and heat and hunger and exhaustion. He gave up everything that ordinary people value: comfort, security, pleasure, companionship, all in pursuit of this thing called enlightenment. And gradually, through years of practice, through moments of insight and long periods of confusion, through teachers who pointed and students who questioned alongside him, through the accumulation of experience that eventually became the release of all experience, he found what he was seeking. Or rather, he discovered that seeking itself was the obstacle, that what he was looking for had always been here, that the ox had never been lost, that his true nature had always been present, simply obscured by the very effort to find it. He had his great awakening, his moment of seeing through the illusion of separation, of recognizing that self and other, subject and object, seeker and sought, were all distinctions that dissolved when examined closely. He experienced the great emptiness that is not empty, but the source of all fullness. He understood finally what all the teachings had been pointing toward. And then, this is the crucial part, he did not stay in that transcendent state, did not remain in meditation on the mountaintop, did not cling to the experience of awakening as if it were an achievement to be protected. Instead, he did what the 10th picture shows. He came down from the mountain and returned to the marketplace. The marketplace is the world. The marketplace is ordinary life with all its mess and beauty and complication. The marketplace is where people struggle and laugh and argue and help each other and hurt each other and live their lives without any thought of enlightenment or Buddha nature or transcendent truth. The marketplace is where vegetables need to be bought, and children need to be fed, and floors need to be swept, and kindness needs to be offered, and work needs to be done. The traveller enters this marketplace, and to ordinary eyes he looks like any other person. He is not wearing special robes. He is not radiating visible light. He is not floating above the ground or performing miracles. He is simply there, present, ordinary, complete. His bag is full of gifts, but they are simple gifts. Perhaps food for someone hungry, perhaps a kind word for someone suffering, perhaps labor offered where labor is needed, perhaps laughter shared, perhaps silence when silence is what someone needs. Before his journey, the traveller lived in the marketplace but was not really present. He was always somewhere else in his mind, worrying about the future, replaying the past, comparing his life to some imagined better life, seeking something other than what was here. He moved through the market like a ghost, physically present but mentally absent, touching nothing deeply, connecting with no one fully. During his journey, the traveller left the marketplace entirely, seeking truth in sacred places, in monasteries and meditation halls, in silence and solitude and spiritual practice. This was necessary. The leaving was part of the finding. The seeking was part of the discovering. But it was not the end. Now, returning, the traveller is fully present in the marketplace in a way he never was before. He buys vegetables and sees the vendor clearly not as an object or a means to an end, but as another expression of the same Buddha nature that he has recognized in himself. He carries a child across a muddy street and feels no separation between himself and the child, between the carrying and the carried. He sweeps the steps of a shop, and the sweeping is not a chore, but a meditation, each stroke complete in itself, requiring nothing more than this moment's attention. The difference is not in what he does, but in how he does it. Before seeking, chopping wood and carrying water were tedious tasks to be endured. During seeking, chopping wood and carrying water were distractions from spiritual practice. After finding, chopping wood and carrying water are themselves the entirety of spiritual life, complete and perfect exactly as they are. There is a famous Zen saying that captures this. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The actions are the same. The wood is the same. The water is the same. But the one chopping and carrying has completely transformed, or rather, the illusion of a separate one doing the chopping and carrying has dissolved, and there is just chopping, just carrying, just this moment's activity arising and passing in the vast space of awareness. The traveller in the marketplace is not trying to help people. He simply helps because helping is what this moment calls for. He is not trying to be kind. He is kind because kindness is the natural expression of seeing clearly, of recognizing that the apparent separation between self and other is illusory. He is not trying to be enlightened. He has forgotten all about enlightenment and simply lives, fully and completely, whatever this moment requires. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught that the only three things that matter are how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. The traveller returning to the marketplace loves completely because he no longer sees others as separate from himself. He lives gently because he recognizes the Buddha nature in all beings. He lets go gracefully because he understands that everything is already in the process of letting go, that clinging creates suffering, that opening the hand releases both the burden and the one who carries it. In the marketplace, an old woman has dropped her basket and vegetables are rolling across the ground. The traveller helps her gather them without thinking, without expecting thanks, without any sense that he is doing something virtuous. It is simply what the moment requires, as natural as breathing, as automatic as the heart beating. A child is crying, separated from his mother in the crowd. The traveller picks him up, speaks gently to him, helps him find his mother. The reunion happens and the traveller continues on his way, not holding on to the moment, not using it to confirm his goodness, not even remembering it particularly. It arose, it passed like everything else. Someone asks him a question about the Dharma, about the teachings, about how to find peace. The traveller might answer with words, or with silence, or with laughter, or by simply being present so completely that the question dissolves in the asking. He has no fixed method, no standard response. Each moment is new, and he meets it freshly, without overlay of past knowledge or future expectation. This is what gift-bestowing hands means, not that the traveller is particularly generous or that he gives away special presents, but that his very presence is a gift. His attention is a gift. His recognition of Buddha nature in all he encounters is a gift. He gives what each moment requires him to give, and he does it so naturally, so unself-consciously, that there is no giver, no gift, no receiver, just the activity of giving arising and completing itself. The marketplace is busy, noisy, full of desire and aversion, full of people caught up in their dramas and struggles, and the traveller moves through it all with perfect ease, not because he is above it or beyond it, but because he is completely it, completely here, completely participating without the separation that creates resistance. Before his journey, the marketplace was overwhelming, too much noise, too much demand, too much suffering. During his journey, the marketplace was something to escape from, to transcend, to leave behind in pursuit of something purer. After his journey, the marketplace is simply where life happens, and life happening is itself the practice, the teaching, the entire point. There is nowhere else to be. There is nothing else to find. The ox was never lost. True nature has always been here, in the marketplace, in the ordinary activity of living, in the simple tasks that need doing, and the simple kindness that life requires. As you lie here now, at the end of these 12 stories, you might understand that you too are in the marketplace, that you too are returning from a journey that never took you anywhere. You have travelled through these teachings, the monk with his stone, the overflowing cup, Hakuins. Is that so? The strawberry between tigers, the stolen moon, the sound of one hand, Joshu's dog, the wild geese, the temple fire, the emperor's merit, the blind musician, and where have you arrived? Here, exactly where you started, in this body, in this breath, in this moment. But perhaps you see it differently now. Perhaps the ordinary has become extraordinary. Perhaps the simple act of lying down to rest has revealed itself as complete, as enough, as itself, the entirety of the spiritual path. Tomorrow you will wake. You will return to your marketplace, your work, your relationships, your tasks and responsibilities in ordinary life. And the question is, will you return as you left, or will you return with gift-bestowing hands? Will you move through your day absent and distracted, or present and participating? Will you see others as separate, or recognize the same nature in them that you have recognized in yourself? The journey is complete. The seeking has ended, not because you have found some special state or achieved some permanent transcendence, but because you have discovered that what you were seeking was always here, in the most ordinary moments, in the simple act of being alive and aware. Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself. This was always the teaching. You do not make the grass grow. You do not force spring to arrive. You simply allow what is already happening to happen. Participate in it fully. Return to the marketplace of your life with hands open and ready to offer whatever this moment requires. The 10th picture shows the traveller entering the marketplace, but it could just as easily show him lying down to sleep, or waking to greet the morning, or eating breakfast, or walking to work. Every moment is the marketplace. Every moment is the return. Every moment is the opportunity to recognize what has never been lost and live from that recognition. Peace comes from within, the Buddha taught. Do not seek it without. The traveller discovered this. The marketplace did not give him peace. The mountain did not give him peace. The teachers and teachings did not give him peace. Peace was always within, always here, always available when he stopped seeking it somewhere else. You have completed the circle. 12 gates opened and passed through, and they have brought you back to the beginning, to this moment, to this breath, to this ordinary, extraordinary experience of being alive. The ox is found. The journey is complete. The marketplace awaits. But there is no rush. For now, rest. Let these teachings settle into your bones like rain into earth. Let the stories dissolve back into the silence from which they came. Let the seeking end and the simple being remain. Tomorrow, the marketplace. Tonight, this peace. Always, this presence. Forever, this return to what has never left. The traveler enters the marketplace with gift-bestowing hands, and the traveler is you, and the marketplace is everywhere, and the gifts are already being given in the simple fact of being here, being aware, being alive. Before these stories, you breathed. After these stories, you breathe. The stories have changed nothing and everything. The journey took you nowhere and brought you home. Rest now in that homecoming. Sleep in that completion. Wait tomorrow with hands ready to give what only you can give: your presence, your attention, your recognition that everything and everyone you encounter is the same. Buddha nature wearing different clothes, playing different roles, all of us together in the marketplace of being, all of us already home. The circle is complete, the gate is open, the path continues exactly where you are. Welcome home, you never left.